How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Pritchard Pub. This evening we have special guest, the Lord himself, Mr. Lord Otter. How's it going, everybody?
Hello, hello.
Hello.
So, Mr. Otter, do you prefer Mr. Otter, or is that your father's name?
Mr. Otter is just fine with me. People call me Otter for short, so you can axe the Lord part for now.
All right. Otter for short. We'll just start with the name. What's the story behind the name?
It's quite a bit of a story, all things considered. I came out from the river one day and I just decided that I wanted to start writing. In all seriousness, though, this was related to kind of as a child, the whole pen name. I had gone to my local zoo as a kid, and I just kind of grown a natural fondness for otters. I even had a toy, and it kind of spiraled into a username, and that went into a pen name from there. So it's quite kind of a funny story of fondness for an animal, which turned into a profile, which turned into a character, I guess.
So it's like your spirit animal.
Yes. I swear I'm not a furry, though.
Yeah. Shout outs to Jake Calta. So you're aware that I'm writing a story called
Is he a furry?
No, but he's going to be labeled as one just because he has anthropomorphized animal people that are they're in the furry fashion, and he says not to blame him for society co-opting his marketing idea. Is the words he puts it as, basically he thinks it's cool, and it's what he chose as his marketing thing for his world. And the internet kind of happens to have this whole furry side. So yeah, anytime furries are brought up, I have to give Jake Calta a shout out.
I'm not sure. I'm going to try to get in here on my app instead, because I have to drive to my appointment and I want to be able to have my GPS. So I'll be right back, you guys.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I've read some of Jacob Calta's work in the past. I think he has some really interesting writing that he goes with. It's something you don't necessarily see all that much right now. He's really going with a unique premise with the whole post-apocalyptic pseudo cyberpunk angle. I think it's really unique.
Yeah, you gotta have some sort of angle, right? And post-apocalyptic is never a bad place to start. If I'm honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Fallout fan myself, so when anybody wants to take an honest crack at doing a post-apocalyptic story, it snags my attention. And if it's done very well, it can end up being one of my favorite franchises. It really just depends.
100%. I was watching The Walking Dead in real time when it was first airing. Basically when Negan got onto the scene in that show, it was like a fever pitch, the show reached this crazy boiling point. I remember it was like getting praise and headlines for characters dying before I saw anything about Game of Thrones,
Yeah. What did you think about season 2 whenever it was coming out?
So season 1, I remember that it was season 2. They did a noticeable shift and slowed everything way down. They sent him to the farm, I believe, is what was going on.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it just slowed way down, and it became like more of like a zombie farmstead show for a little bit. But there was a lot of development that happened there. I have my gripes with it overall. I mean, it's kind of its own meme at this point, and I think the lore behind the relationship between the creator of The Walking Dead and like the studio behind it is fascinating. It's very combative.
Yeah, and that I believe that was also the season whenever Frank Darabont was run off of set, which is a crying shame because I think he did a stellar job with the earlier episodes. I also hear that the seasons pick right up after season 2. Season 2 is kind of where I stopped watching, so that's more or less why I was asking, just out of morbid curiosity. I know opinions tend to vary on season 2.
It always bothers that in the beginning of Walking Dead, that's what we're talking about, right? Just
yeah.
Okay. Why did the zombies? I mean, they hauled ass, and then they became so slow.
Say that again.
Really? In The Walking Dead, in the beginning seasons, the zombies fucking hauled ass, and then they became super slow.
Oh yeah, there's a reason behind that. They're rotting.
No, I don't believe that. They're not rotting enough for that.
No, that's definitely a problem actually over time, because when you calculate how fast they've rotted, then extrapolate how much time remains on the show and how much time has passed.
They don't portray them as very rotted though, compared to, you know what I mean? It just doesn't line up.
That's the actual lore behind it. A fresh zombie is a lot stronger and, you know, not decomposed.
Superhuman fast though.
It also seems to vary by how a zombie outbreak is kind of handled. I know The Walking Dead handles it more like they are rotting corpses instead of it being like a biocontagion outbreak. But that's something I honestly prefer myself. If you're gonna have zombies in your fiction, I prefer the actual Walking Dead instead of it just being. And I like the movie, but the sort of 28 days later, like full sprint Olympic runner zombies.
I have to.
Yeah, those are wild. And they're the only way it works is with like a rage virus.
Yeah, at that point, what was it? I believe it was Zombieland. I really like their description. It's like mad human disease.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
That's
yeah. So it's sort of like Night of the Living Dead, but only by a couple of degrees of separation. At that point, it's still technically zombies, but it's more or less doing its own thing with it.
Yeah.
Once The Walking Dead brought in like the mayor and all that stuff, I'm like, what the fuck are we watching? You know, and I know it's like somewhat true to the comics. I never read the comics, but I don't know if it was just as ridiculous in the comics, but it was so horrible on the show. Like,
well, that's
the comics kind of go a unique angle with it. There is still the mayor and everything, or no, it's the governor. That's what I'm recalling.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's and generally speaking, I actually do prefer the comic, but it kind of goes with the angle more of zombies are more or less the backdrop. Yes, they're a threat, but it's really more about other outposts of people, how they've kind of learned how to survive in this hellish post-apocalypse. What have they turned into? That's more or less the questions that the comic really likes to ask.
Yep, 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 reason to read a story and write a story, just to dive into like that. It's classic good writing, in my opinion, because you're selling the world rather than like a gimmick or something. You know, the world is the gimmick. Does that make sense? Like
it becomes a lot more speculative at that point. It's asking you these high concept questions like how would humanity survive? How would it change after the apocalypse? It's asking questions that are a bit deeper than the surface level. Oh, what would you do if there was a zombie outbreak tomorrow?
Yeah. And in that same vein, I think Fallout does the same thing. I think we've discovered a universal truth when it comes to storytelling. I won't say, there's no way to say the best way to tell a story, but there are a lot of like universal truths. And, there's universal truths.
Yeah, and Fallout especially it's a franchise I could gush about, honestly. I have some fairly mixed opinions on the Amazon Prime show. To put it simply, I think what it does well, it does really well, but there's still plenty of stuff it mishandles, and some of it mishandles quite a bit, in my opinion. It's kind of along the same levels as something like Fallout 3 or Fallout 4. It has plenty of good bits, but then there's other parts where it kind of disrespects the lore, which I'm not really a fan of.
Right. I'm right there with you.
The lore.
I think the biggest change they made in the show was what they did with the NCR. Shady Sands. The New California Republic in Fallout is supposed to be one of the biggest factions after the apocalypse. It's actually kind of a semblance of civilization coming back to their wasteland. But what the show kind of does is it nukes Shady Sands, and then it also pretty much scatters whatever influence they had. And this is something that chronologically it happened 4 years, as it claims, 4 years before the events of Fallout New Vegas, which
before
it was supposed to happen in 2277. I think that's what the show kind of set up.
I thought it was like 7 years after New Vegas. And like,
you could look it in the video game, though.
Should I look it up? Is this a topic tonight? I can look it up here. Let's
I thought you said that in New Vegas you could nuke it.
You can nuke NCR. Yeah. That's 100%.
Yeah, it's like you can nuke certain. I don't think it's like Shady Sands, but you can nuke NCR territory in New Vegas. Yeah, that's like the Lonesome Road DLC.
Yeah.
So basically, the show took a liberty saying, "No, that whole place doesn't exist." Do you think they did that for budget reasons, or?
I kind of think that some of it was to showcase a lot of what Fallout is, but also keeping it sort of like one of the later entries in the timeline, because where New Vegas kind of leaves off, it's one of the later games. It's really saying New Vegas, the whole Mojave Wasteland, is still fringe territory. It's largely unclaimed. It's being kind of battled over. Everything that's being controlled by the NCR is a lot more civilized. So I think they wanted to free that up. That's my personal guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
A legitimate right to have, for sure.
Yeah, and I say that while also watching the show and seeing a lot of the smaller side stories they have. I actually enjoy those quite a bit. Those feel very Fallout.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm looking right now, and okay, 2077. Okay, so the video game takes place over various centuries. They don't necessarily overlap. The show takes place 219 years after the nuclear fallout. Okay, it doesn't take place in 2077. My bad. It takes place 219 years after that. Are you gonna make me do math, website? Really? Come on now. But yeah, I don't know. We'd have to figure that number out, figure out when like New Vegas is set, and go from there. But
I know some Fallout lore. I think New Vegas is like 2281, so it's like 4 years after Fallout 3. I believe the show says it's 2277 whenever Shady Sands get nukes, or it gets blown off the face of the earth.
98. Okay. So it's 2301. It's in the year 2301 or something like that.
I'm not sure if it's 2301. I thought it was 2289. It could be 2301. I may have my math wrong.
Because it says right here, the show takes place 219 years after the nuclear fallout in 2077. So that's 2277 plus 19. So what's 77 plus 19 essentially?
2296.
2296. Well, there's the year. So after New Vegas?
It must be.
Okay. So like just a few years after New Vegas, like I thought.
Yeah.
So that means Caesar's Legion has come through, NCR has come through. NCR may have been nuked. Same with Caesar's Legion. All those tribes could still exist. We saw Maximus talk about fiends. The fiends are a tribe in New Vegas of chem addicts. There's Mr. House. There could be a robot army there right now. The silhouette of New Vegas at the end of the season showed it intact. It looks like it's still going, right? Unless something happened. But yeah, I digress. I think what it is they wanted all the games to still be canon and then just kind of augment from there. So
yeah, I think for the most part that was the goal of the show. And I mean, like I still have gripes with it, but I do think for the most part they succeeded. For the most part.
Yeah. Same. It's not perfect. Yeah, nobody should die hard defend it, and nobody should like absolutely hate it. Personal opinion for me, but Yeah,
and a lot of the Fallout discussion has made me want to go back through some of those older games. I have a real soft spot for Fallout 1 especially. Fallout 2 is also there's a lot of stuff that's done in Fallout 2 that I think gets forgotten in the greater kind of like RPG space. There were a lot of choices that game gave you.
Right. Yeah, the games are absolute treasures. Honestly.
Yeah,
they have their problems just like the show. We've all glitched so much, but it's so good. It's so good.
I don't know if you guys have ever watched any of Tim Kane's YouTube channel. He's one of the original creators of Fallout. He'll go in depth on how those games were developed and the overall design philosophy behind them. It's really interesting stuff. I also think Tim Kane is just a really good speaker. So he doesn't really edit his videos much, but he still holds your attention just because of that. And it's really entertaining. I really like it.
And that's that's a craft unto itself. But yeah, anyway, away from the Fallout talk, we could brother, since as a default we could just bounce back to Fallout whenever there's a dull moment, but I wanted to talk about like your writing and stuff a little bit more.
Yeah.
You just got the one book, right? Steel and Stormbright?
Yeah, it's my debut novel I released a few months back. I'm currently editing the second novel as we speak. So my first novel out, technically it's a novella, is The Curse of the Star Raids. It has two brothers, Steel and Stormbright, where they're kind of facing off against the wider world in this highly hostile environment. But it's also a tale of growing and kind of persevering against the odds. And that kind of storytelling has always spoken to me directly.
Absolutely. Is it a bit of a coming of age?
Yeah, it's definitely a coming of age story. They're both teenagers within the span of the first book. Steel is only about 17 and Stormbright is around 15 years of age. And it's very much a matter of being able to go from that coming of age from child to adult, especially whenever life throws a curveball, some of which can destroy everything. So it's about overcoming that and finding your own strength.
I dig it. I dig it. Kind of reminds me of Spirit Animals a little bit. It's my coming of age one.
No, wait. Don't we have that already? Do we?
Have what?
It's either on our list or we already. Do we have that yet? Because it's either in the lump of books we already bought or the ones we're going to. I think it's on the ones we're going to get.
Yeah, for sure though. We either have your book already or we're planning on getting it. Did we read your blurb on our blurb stream that time?
I believe you all did. I think I sent it to you. I'm not gonna say that I'm not gonna guarantee that, but I think I did.
Okay. Well, if we read your blurb, then we have it.
If we don't already have it, if we do, we read the blurb. But if we read the blurb, we do have it. But if not, it's one of, because we have mostly females on our second list, but we do have a few male authors on that second list too. And I'm blanking if we have it or not, because I've seen your book cover so many times. I feel like we do have it, but I could be wrong. It could be on our list still. But
yeah.
We have plans.
Yeah, it's high on the list if it is.
Yeah, and I'm highly grateful. I'm glad to hear you all are interested in it.
I do.
It certainly means a lot to me, but then again, I'm the author, so it better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many good creators. It's amazing, actually.
Oh yeah, it's very optimistic. That's one of the things about the Iron Age that's hit me since the very beginning. You could just feel this sort of energy, this zeitgeist in the air, where it's like the sort of like potential energy of a lot of people wanting to create, just from the sheer amount of frustration with Hollywood and traditional publishing, mainstream media. And all it really took was just a few different creators. It took Ethan Van Sciver, Eric July, Razorfist. All they had to say was, "Fuck it, I'm doing it myself." And then the rest just kind of came together from there. More and more people started banding together, promoting, and for me, it's one of the most hopeful things I've seen in the last few years, for sure. I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
Right. And of course, indie creators already existed, but they really kind of like paved the way in that, like showing the actual success that you can manifest for yourself, and kind of laid blueprints, and then, of course, coined the Iron Age. Wasn't that, I think it was Razorfist, right?
Yeah, I think Razorfist was the one who put the Iron Age tag on it, though it's kind of been a growing movement for a while now. But it more or less, I think a lot of people will attribute it to Razorfist, but I kind of line up with what he says, where it's more just a general movement of indies pretty much saying we just want to make our own stories, which is really, for me, that's the best way to phrase it, in my opinion.
Yeah, one thing that I always thought, until getting into the Iron Age area myself, is that, it's like you see all of these remakes, and it's like there's so many people on planet Earth, and so many things have already been done. Like, you literally can't make an original thought or story because everything's already been done. But I've been proven wrong so many times, and like my mind's just blown by the creativity and the originality that the Iron Age has to offer from so many people.
Yeah, and I kind of fall in line with what Orson Scott Card says on ideas. I've kind of become of the opinion that ideas are fairly cheap. They are important, but it's more the execution of how you handle those ideas that's really going to create your own voice and give it its own unique identity. So I that's become my personal philosophy, because I know for a fact my stories aren't original. I know they've been done in some way, shape, or form before. That said, I do want to give my own spin on it. So that's the angle I really approach it with.
Same.
Your personalization, that's how it does become original,
Yeah, for sure. And there's no duplicate for you. Nobody's quite the same. So even if you have very similar ideas to something else, I mean, I still think you're going to put your own spin on it that's unique to you.
Yeah, Yeah, and it can be done poorly or it can be done wonderfully, you know.
This is why I think tropes are actually really important for writing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I don't think tropes and cliches are necessarily bad. I just think it's more how it's handled within the context of the plot and the narrative itself. If it's done well, you'll recognize it, but it'll fit in there so well that you couldn't see it any other way. And you see this in some of the absolute masterpieces of our time and ages past as well. When it becomes a lot of the negative connotations of cliches and tropes comes from where it's just being done consistently bad over time, and that's where a lot of the contempt for it comes around, I think.
Yep.
I agree.
Were you gonna say something, babe?
No, I just said I agree.
Okay. And like you said, you just got to you want to put your own spin on things, you know what I mean? And not like in a modern, like I'm recreating this timeless masterpiece in a horrible way kind of thing. Like more like I understand the fundamentals of like good storytelling, and there's a reason certain ideas stick around, right? And the reason there's such a thing as bad tropes is because there's a sort of reverence to these tropes, and when they're done poorly, that's when they become cliches, I think. And this cultural reverence, you know, of the the chosen one, right?
Yeah,
that's one example, the chosen one.
And I don't even hate the trope of the chosen one. I do understand why a lot of people have strayed away from it in recent memory. It can sort of give it can give this feeling that everything's too securely in place. It can actually deflate tension, but that's usually when it's done badly. When it's done well, you can usually throw in some clever little twists that will kind of make it go along the lines of something like, oh, the prophecy said this, he's the chosen one, but this could also happen potentially to everyone. You don't know. So
you gotta do it right, you know.
Yeah, there's clever ways you can kind of work around that.
There is.
So for me, that's part of the fun of writing, is finding these fun little questions to really just ask yourself.
Yep. And then figuring it out like a puzzle. Like, how do I do this right? How do I respect this trope? Because once it's a trope, it's culturally revered, as I was saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's how you do it right. You gotta like, how do I respect this? You know?
Yeah. I'll even go to an example in my own book. I wouldn't call this a trope, but it's more of a character archetype. The antagonist in my book I would describe more as a femme fatale, which it feels like a lot of femme fatales are kind of limited towards more like film noir, with a few exceptions. But in this case, this is something I noticed was a thing quite a bit in a lot of swords and sorcery fiction, and it's something that I wanted to bring back more and put it center stage, having sort of a female character given a leading role. It's not necessarily through her physical brawn and strength that she's kind of like leading everyone, but it's her cunning. It's the way she can manipulate others to follow. And I love that. For me, it's one thing I really wanted to do with my story.
It's fucking Christ. Sorry, I'm going to mute.
John says, this is why I chose to take the route I did when I used the chosen one and prophecy tropes in the Black Crown. Yeah, dude, it's not, tropes aren't bad. They become cliches when they aren't respected. Like when people think that they can take shortcuts, or when they think that they can just copy paste something, you know, like it's because they've been disrespected in the past that people are hesitant to touch it. Doesn't mean you can't.
Fucking.
Doesn't mean you can't. There's a reason it works, actually, I would argue.
Yeah, and I mean, as someone who's read The Black Crown myself, I have to agree with John A. Douglas. I really like how he handled the chosen one trope in that book. I think he took it in some really interesting and unique directions, which is really what you want to do with tropes. You're not necessarily subverting them, but you're making them your own, and that's what I love to see.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. You're like what's it called? You're taming them. You're taming the tropes, the wild tropes.
Yeah, they're all tools in your little toolbox there for you to use. Once you kind of realize that it's not you're conforming to those tools, but you're mixing and matching to make the right kind of story that you want to make. And all of it can be used to your advantage once you kind of learn their function and also some of the original intent behind how the authors used them in the first place. I actually think that's a big reason why I think a lot of writers should be reading older fiction as well as newer fiction. So that way you get more of that kind of like expanded perspective on why those tropes are being used and how they came to be.
Yeah. Do you think that your favorite genres to read and write are the same or different?
Ooh. I would generally say I'm more of a fantasy writer at the moment. That said, I'm still kind of I'm still testing my mettle in a bit of sci-fi and horror. I'm actually a big horror fan, which is something I've been meaning to get into more and more. I guess you could say fantasy is my favorite genre to write in, but strangely enough, horror is probably my favorite to read in. I really do enjoy horror.
Yeah, me too, especially reading it. Yeah.
Yeah, horror is it's like one of those there's got to be like 3 very powerful core genres, like horror, comedy, and like something else. Probably romance if it's done right. Or like, I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's just one of those prime genres that is just like about one emotion, which is fear. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I love it whenever I love it whenever you see creators kind of like combining both humor and horror selectively, because when it's done well, it can be absolutely incredible. I'll point to like the Evil Dead movies as a perfect example of how you can mesh the two, since they're both very high concept, and make something that's very unique and very fun. So I love it whenever you're combining like primal emotions like that and just using it to do something very unique with what you're working on. I love that stuff.
Oh yeah.
So are you married? Do you have any kids? I just always ask our guests because I like to know more about their.
I'm a single otter at the moment, mostly.
You do know that the females of your species are famously the best mothers.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Of course I know that.
Okay.
Cool. There's no way I could not have known that, obviously.
Otters, yeah.
That's so cute.
Otter moms are they're just champions.
We're very lovable creatures.
Yeah.
John says he's been studying the romanticy books.
So, since women are mostly readers of romance are mostly women, I think it's just more challenging for male writers, because then it's like they have to claim to know what women want in the romantic department, and that's very hard for most men.
Yep.
Yeah, and what's unique about it is I've come across some male romance writers who have done extremely well, but I think it's also kind of the exception and not the rule, because I think there's sort of a stigma there, but I do kind of want to see more. Granted, I haven't read a ton of romance myself. I've read a little bit of romantic fantasy, but it's more something where I want to see a bit of a mix of perspectives there. I actually just got done reading the New York Times bestseller Fourth Wing, and you could probably classify that as a romance, but compare that to some of the romance stories I've read from Iron Age indies, and it's night and day. Like I'll compare it to let's say Watcher of the Damned and Herverse. Those are 2 romance stories I've read within the Iron Age, and those are leaps and bounds better than what Fourth Wing does.
Yeah, I really truly believe that there's a huge misconception where men feel like they can't do romance because of what I said. But you were talking about the stigma and stuff, so I just wanted to, I guess, elaborate more on my feelings. I feel like it's like very, very important for men and women to both feel that like kind of like romantic love in their lives with their partners. So I think it's weird that there's a stigma for like men liking romance or being able to write it, because I feel like you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if you're in a relationship, you want that affection and love. Like, that's a totally normal thing. It's not just
Yeah,
something.
and I hate to see it that's the case. I do want to see it aimed not only just towards women but towards men as well. Just I don't know, maybe having a bit more of a balance there, because I know for a fact that romance novels are primarily aimed towards women, and a lot of it can sort of like borderline go into like rather raunchy territory. I don't know how much of that percentage is the case though. So I'm really not sure there.
Yeah, I've heard it can get pretty raunchy.
Yeah, Fourth Wing gets there a few times, and I'll take Watcher of the Damned any day. Watcher of the Damned is written so much better in my opinion.
Yeah, she's actually examining the nature between men and women, right? Like,
yeah,
she's actually
and
trying to do something with her writing, basically.
It's not even just that. It's also R.H. Snow is one of those writers where I can tell she's not only read a bit of poetry, but she writes poetry pretty frequently. You can see that in her descriptions and dialogue. And for me, that when I read romance, I want to see, I'm not going to say it's an absolute rule, but one of the things I'm usually looking for is a little more flowery language, just to kind of, I don't know, establish more of kind of like this romantic tone. And when it's done very well, in my opinion, Watcher of the Dam just does just that. It can be very beautiful.
Agreed.
So I'm going to cite that as a really good example of using romantic description and just kind of like expanding your vocabulary with poetry and that sort of writing. It can really draw you in as a reader, even for someone like me who doesn't normally read romance.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. I would agree with that. Yeah, it is one of those powerful things. It's like love, right? So like love, fear, laughter with the comedy. I don't know. I think there's probably a lot more of these key feelings when it comes to like storytelling and writing than I can think of off the top of my head. But like, yeah, dude, I just love writing for sure. John says R.H. Snow's book goes so much deeper than just man likes woman. It's an introspective take on how men and women, diametrically opposed yet intrinsically drawn to one another. Yes, no, yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, like an examination of it. Yeah. The only other show I've seen kind of trying to do this, or the only other story, at least recently, is Blue Eye Samurai. I don't know if you got a chance to watch that, Lord Otter. I would be curious as to what R.H. Snow thinks about that show, because that's what it's doing. It's examining like male and female relationships, like the dichotomy or whatever.
Yeah, I can't say I've watched it. I'll have to check it out though. That sounds pretty interesting. Blue-Eyed Samurai, you said?
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix.
Oh, okay. I'll have to check it out. That sounds pretty fun.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the what's that Disney movie where Mulan? It's like a Mulan plot in a way.
Yeah. I
In
can
a way.
especially see it in the aesthetic for it.
In a way, yeah. But like, so like, yeah, that's kind of how it works. Is like this female is taking the role of a warrior. That she's the main character, so we follow her, and thus, of course, every male she comes across, it brings up this it just brings up this question of like male and female dynamics, and then on top of that, you have the other side of that coin that's not all business, which is like relationships, emotions, stuff like that. Like, so she gets this sidekick type character basically, who's like not like a traditional guy. He's like weak and out of shape and kind of like, but he's strong in a lot of ways because he's like that lovable comic relief, wholesome character that that is required in every like anime and story. Honestly,
it's a tried and true combo. It's proven to work, which is kind of ties back into where we were talking about tropes. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So a lot of my favorite tropes are, let's see, in fantasy I really like the trope of having many different fantasy races, and I think that is for the same reason that we were talking about like Fallout and The Walking Dead earlier. I think I'm pretty sure one of the golden rules for an immersive world and an intriguing one at that is to have some way to create many factions. So like Fallout, even if you don't even consider everything going on the surface, you have 122 different vaults that, even though they're the same creator, they all have very different experiments going on. Thus, you create very different cultures over the course of like 250 years or whatever. So right off the bat, you have factions, right? And The Walking Dead, we discussed how the zombies are the backdrop to this tribalism, this post-apocalyptic tribalism is really what it's about.
And to steer a little more into the Fallout discussion, this is one of the big reasons why I'm such a big fan of that franchise. The Tim Kaine and the other creators for Fallout were very transparent and kind of like what inspired it as they were in the middle of making it, because Fallout had many different inspirations, from horror to sci-fi to these like weird westerns. It was like I think one of the biggest inspirations was A Boy and His Dog, which is a very strange movie, but it was also a big influence on how the vaults worked in the games.
Yep. It's not a movie for everybody, babe. If you're listening, because we got to watch A Boy and Its Dog. We own it. It's in my library.
I'm trying to figure out why my card just got declined, because I have money and it kept declining, so he just gave me my coffee for free.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
but anyway,
card won't work.
Anyway, yeah, we own that movie, so I was gonna say we got to watch it soon. It's a heavy inspiration for Fallout. Same with all the Mad Max stuff in the Mad Max world.
Yep. Mad Max is a given. Forbidden Lovecraft. Planet was also a big inspiration.
There's so much Lovecraft in Fallout.
Yes.
There's so much Lovecraft. It's one thing I love about it, actually.
To the point where they're referencing the Necronomicon. Was it Abdullah Hazred in the third game?
They have like a Dunwich
references.
They have like a Dunwich horror mission. It's like a direct mission. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's great. Not subtle in the slightest, but hey, I'll take it. I know not everyone's a Lovecraft fan, but for the most part, I enjoy his writing.
Have you heard anybody complain about that in the Fallout universe, or has it always just been that's cool?
I haven't really heard of anyone complaining about the Lovecraft influence in Fallout.
Right.
It's more or less. Yeah, it's heavy-handed, but it works.
Yeah, even when it's heavy-handed, people still won't complain, is like what I'm saying. Like it doesn't matter how cheesily they lay on the Lovecraft lore, everybody just loves to see it, right? So they're just like, hell yeah. Like I feel like that's kind of just like everybody's reaction to it. I don't know. So that tells me something too, that like not only was like Lovecraft onto a few things as well, just like you could argue with like Hitchcock and Poe and some of the other morbid writers of our I don't know, recent time in the scheme of things, but they're onto something, man. And I think it's okay. Back to the trope thing, it's okay, as we just discussed with Fallout, so blatantly just having having Lovecraft right there in front of us, that it's okay to wear your inspirations on your sleeve.
Yeah,
as long as you do it right.
I think that's for me, that's part of my writing philosophy is I mean, everybody's going to be influenced by something, but as much as I can anyway, I try to wear those inspirations on my sleeve. And the majority of what I've been inspired by has been by authors like, of course, Robert E. Howard, Jack Vance, Fritz Leiber, but also some H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, Lord Dunsany, and it's it's something where as much as I like to kind of like take those ideas and make them my own, I still want to try and like say, hey, you should check out these authors too. These are the guys that inspired me. Like you should really check out their stuff. It's there's nothing quite like it.
That's the caveat with wearing your inspiration on your sleeve. It means like when somebody looks down at that wrist cuff that you got, that fancy wrist cuff, you know, and they're like, dang, that's nice. And you're like, yeah, it's so and so, you know, it's so and so brand 500X, you know, that I got last or I got the idea from this person, you know what I mean? It's an excuse to say that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, I've always been a fan of that thing, so I decided to elaborate on that idea in my own work. Like, I'm realizing this about certain things. Like there's an eventuality to sci-fi, for example. Like, how far does that go? Because I feel like really you get to the point where there's power armor, there's lightsabers, there's laser pistols, there's spaceship battles, there's planetary destruction, and there, you know what I mean, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe faster than light travel, but you know what I mean, like inter-universal travel.
Right. There's always going to be certain expectations, and it's one of the advantages of tying a genre to the type of story that you're using. It's not necessarily to help narrow the scope of your story, but it's there for marketing, just to give the reader an idea of what to expect, which is always a nice thing. But
and yeah, those are all tropes, right?
Yeah, and one of the I'll go ahead and cite one of the big inspirations for Steel and Stormbright. The setting for the series, it's heavily based on gods and how they can influence the world directly. One of the major inspirations I used for that was it was Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity series. I really liked how they handled deities in those games. And a big part of that, kind of like the idea of how one of the main characters, how Stormbright is given his powers early on. That's through direct interference from the god Calamtu, which kind of it reminded me more than a bit of how that sort of done in Pillars of Eternity, where it's like the gods can manifest themselves, and they're kind of like a different ideal, each and every one of them. They're different philosophical ideals where they physically manifest, and oftentimes they'll butt heads with each other. I always like that. So I'm not going to say it's 1-to-1 or anything, but it definitely played a role for sure.
Rarely things should be 1-to-1 is all I'll say on that. Like, why would they be 1-to-1? Like, what like, even as a huge fan, right, of something, why would you do 1-to-1? Like, why would somebody just make Star Wars all over again, right? Like, what really would be the point of that, unless it's to live out some sort of like fan fantasy? Like, I actually wanted Darth Vader to wind up with this other person. You know, you ship two characters, right? Or like, I wanted Yoda to do this other thing. Like, that would really be the only point, is like power fantasy.
Funny that you mentioned it. Earlier this same day, the group of us who were reviewing Fourth Wing, a lot of my problems with the characters and that whole plot were just rolling around in my head, and I think this is one of the things a lot of us writers do, is we're trying to say, okay, we didn't like the story, what would I have done differently? And so And especially if it's a bad story or one you just really don't like, you'll find that that's much easier to do. You'll start coming up with alternative ideas and just start going with them, and they keep going. And it's I also think that's one of the virtues of reading bad stories is it can help exercise those muscles, which I also think translates into your own style as a writer. In fact, how I began my book was a direct response to a series which I actually do have a lot of respect for, but it lost me in one very specific area. It actually bothered me so much that I went, okay, I'm writing a book because I'm going to explore this idea. And
yeah, they
that
failed
series,
this idea. It's a good idea. I need to do justice to it.
Yeah, and that series
yeah.
was Vinland Saga, which I do have a lot of respect for, but
Sick.
just in a couple areas, it really lost me.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of people have that same opinion of Vinland. I rated it very highly personally, but I am not like a diehard fan. I would say, like, I haven't like rewatched it a million times or anything. I watched it for my review and then carried on to season 2 and watched the content that was out. Picked up one, I think just one of the books, and haven't really even finished it. So, I mean, not too much of a fan myself, but I loved what I saw, but apparently not enough to really dive into it.
I'm a big seinen manga fan myself, which is part of how I kind of market Curse of the Star Raids. I know it's more of a swords and sorcery saga, but at the same time, I like to think that it pulled a fair amount of DNA from other series like Berserk, Vagabond, Vinland Saga. There's definitely that tonal vibe to it. So that's kind of one of my marketing points. If you enjoy seinen stories, you may enjoy this, because that's a big part of what I enjoy in fiction, and it naturally translated over.
Hell yeah, as it does. So it's like dark.
Yeah, it's I guess if you want to put a snazzy buzzword over it, you could say it's like grim bright, where it's it's definitely a darker story, but it's there to kind of like instill a hopeful message, which is what I wanted. I wanted an optimistic story that doesn't shy away from the dark stuff. That way it feels like best way I can describe it is this is one of the reasons why I'll read something like Berserk, is if you're in a bad spot in your life, it can actually be sort of like comforting to know that, hey, someone else is suffering right there beside you. And it kind of helps you get through what you're going through in your life. I wanted sort of a similar vibe here, where it's grim when it needs to be, but for a purpose. It's not there to just bring everyone down. It's there to help lift you up. And a big part of the journey here is going from losing everything to building your own strength of character and becoming a hero from that, learning values of altruism and heroism from that whenever you see the alternative. That's what I wanted to convey in the Curse of the Star Raids.
Nice. I like that term though, grim bright. You should really run away with that, personally.
Yeah, I'll run away right off into the river and the sea with that. Yes. Share it with all the other otters.
Yeah, I mean, I like to, because like the problem is like pessimism, right? I noticed this about, okay, using Fallout as the go-to example. Shout outs to Mr. Mindflayer joining us. Hey, Mr.
Mr. Mindflayer.
Mr. Flair. So Fallout is, what's the word? Okay, so there's nihilism, and then there's like, what's the word? Help me here. I knew what it was, but it's where you're like bitter.
I'm not sure if pessimism is the right word. Where it's bitter is probably a good term for it.
Yeah. Fallout is bitter, right? It has a bitter attitude towards the end of the world. Like, look at these assholes are all gonna fuck it up, basically. It's not really like it's not conveying a hopeless message as much as it's conveying a bitter message.
Yeah,
like
and
war never changes.
I think it's for me this is kind of a distinction I like to make. You can have a pessimistic or a nihilistic setting, but the story itself doesn't have to be that way. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the example of Berserk. Berserk's setting is very pessimistic, like about as pessimistic as you can get. But the story of Guts being able to push through that, it's the exact opposite. Despite all the odds, he somehow still manages to push through. That's very hopeful. So you get that direct point of contrast, and
to have a purely, I don't know how to put this, a purely innocent world is naive.
Right. I think that's one of the reasons why whenever authors are giving advice to each other, they'll say, yeah, to make your story really interesting, as an author, just be sadistic to your main character. Because in theory, your main characters they're going to be suffering usually the most out of everyone. Because it's around them where most of your conflict is actually happening. As far as I know, that's the reason why they're giving that advice. But to bring it back to Fallout, this is one reason why I really like Fallout, in spite of dealing with some nihilistic themes. But I think it's a lot more tactful than a lot of people give it credit for.
Right.
The idea, whenever Tim Kaine and a lot of other people at Interplay and Black Isle Studios, when they were making it, was we're exploring the ethics of a post-nuclear world.
Yes.
So in the aftermath of an apocalypse, you're naturally going to have some pessimism there, certain elements of nihilism too. But as far as your character's story is concerned, it kind of asks you the question, do you want it to be a hopeful story? Do you want it to be morally ambiguous? What do you want to do? And that's what I really like about Fallout, because it gives you those options.
Instead of just forcing the pessimism down your throat, they went ahead and wrote like 2 or 3 extremely hopeful and positive and heroic storylines too in each game, because you can choose the ending, right? So there's a reason people
you can convince the master that there is a kernel of hope, even in kind of like the hellish wasteland that they're inhabiting. There is still that hope. So I mean, it still deals with optimistic themes, and I think it's something that just about any good RPG should allow the player to have a sense of choice in how they directly influence the world. So I think that's also a byproduct of it. But it's just something I really enjoy. It's a big component of why I enjoy Fallout as much as I do.
Yeah. They're not afraid to tell the good and the bad. It's a very, if it had an alignment in D&D, I would say it is chaotic neutral. Just as a setting,
for sure. Especially with all those pop culture references.
Nuka-Cola, cram. Anyway, so it has enough of the nihilism in there to bring it down to neutral, but like some really powerful, hopeful stories, like just a simple idea of just like making sure everybody has clean water. Nod, nod, wink, wink, right? Like that's a very modern, heroic thing to do, right? Like if you could go into some suffering tribe somewhere and bestow upon them pure, clean, cold drinking water. Oh my goodness, dude. They would become cleaner, like as a people too. Because if they don't have access to clean water, right, then like there's side effects to that. Is another thing that Fallout explores. Like you can, I mean, this isn't the Fallout stream, but like it's just a good example, right, that we're pulling from. You can. There's dirty water. You can drink out of a nasty ass toilet. Like you can put it on hardcore mode and starve to death. You can need sleep. Like it actually does a really good job at forcing you to think about a lot of things. And I think it is just because it's changed hands enough times, and they started off with a good enough idea, and mixed the right core elements together to create their sci-fi world. I think what has happened is they've come across something that's like, this is like late stage Walking Dead, right? Fallout is what Walking Dead wishes it could be. Because like they're kind of the same thing, right? We were just talking about how like you said Fallout explores the idea of morality in like an apocalyptic world and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, or at least that was the goal of the original game. It kind of shifts from game to game. That's another nuance with Fallout. Fallout 2 is a lot more lighthearted. It actually uses a lot of memes, which is very interesting for a second game in your series. But that said, Fallout 2 still does a lot of interesting things. I know Fallout 3 is a lot more of a good guy versus bad guy type of story, with the Brotherhood of Steel being a lot more kind of like noble good guys and the Enclave being evil in that side. And then you have New Vegas, which is a lot more kind of like full-on faction warfare. Everybody wants New Vegas. NCR, Caesar's Legion, they've all got different ideas on how it should be run too.
Which is good.
There's a reason why New Vegas is so beloved. I think it has a lot of really fun ideas it plays with.
Yeah. And so like, some core elements here, like they they have all the eventualities of a sci-fi world, right? Because like gray aliens are canon. That seems like the deepest point of the iceberg in that. But what that implies is that there's probably faster than light travel too, which means the Fallout world is actually the Fallout universe.
Yes.
Potentially.
Fallout.
You could hop in some power armor, go on an alien spaceship, and go to their home world or one of their colonies. Like, the potential there is endless, right?
And Fallout is it playfully uses its inspirations. It does it with a wink and a nod in a very strange sort of way. It says, "Oh yeah, here's a Godzilla reference. Don't try not to think too deeply about it because it's not going to make sense, but just enjoy it while it's there." And that applies all the way to the first game too.
Yeah. And I think everybody can love that because what that is it's a culture reference, right? It's a culture reference. You have to understand culture a little bit to do what they're doing in a lot of ways. Grognak the Barbarian, like, yes, they're ripping off
Silver Shroud.
Yeah, yes, they're ripping off real life in ways, but are they ripping it off, or are they lovingly reminding us of our reality? And which doubles back, dude, that it cleverly doubles back into this whole examination of morality in a post-apocalyptic world and reminding us that this could be our world. This could potentially be like, I mean, this is an exaggerated version of it, but look at how destroyed this world is. It doubles back into the nihilism a little bit. Like, here's all these reminders of real life. And then, there's a destroyed city.
It's one of the reasons why I think the idea of the vaults is so ingenious, because it's exploring the messed up psychology that would follow in the apocalypse. What better way to do that where each vault is kind of like a cruel psychological experiment? So not only are you dealing with darker subject matter, you also have real world examples that you can reference very easily for something like this. And I love the idea that they were able to factor that in, and it fits so naturally into the setting. For me, that's one of the beauties of Fallout's writing, in my opinion. I'll try not to harp on too much more with Fallout. I know
I don't care.
Kind of derailed the conversation.
We're actually talking about writing more than Fallout. How I would interpret it. That's how I would interpret it. So it's okay to talk Fallout. But while we're here, Mindflayer says nihilism, existentialism, absurdism. Yep. Existential dread is powerful, but you don't want it to become nihilism. I don't think. Like hopelessness. That's what that Can we agree that would be like what nihilism, like hope, like there's no point?
Yeah, nihilism is.
There's no
I
point.
mean,
Right?
yeah, a lot of it boils down to nothing means anything. Which
Yeah,
the ultimate question you ask when you're dealing with like true nihilism in storytelling is, why should I even care?
exactly. Yeah, if there's no point to, yeah, dude,
If there's no
exactly.
point to anything, why should I even care about the story?
Yeah, there's no point to the
It kind
story.
of
Then
it invalidates itself.
yeah. So I think nihilism would be that extreme point that you don't want to breach into. That's when it becomes a cliche, right? Like, oh, this isn't pessimism. Well, we will say that we will, because I couldn't think of a word other than bitter. Pessimism is kind of bitter, right? So Fallout would be pessimistic, and nihilism would be the extreme version of that, where it's like, okay, this is too much. Like, what's the point of this story then, right? But
Right.
because like Fallout's examining everything. So what does that tell us? That tells us that some really powerful key core aspects to like a vibrant world that you can dive into. You want teams to root for, factionalism. You want tribes in some way. Even if it's a very modern story, you can create tribes in modern ways, like companies, sports teams. There's ways to create tribes and factions. But ultimately, people want a lot of different unique choices to choose from. This is actually a powerful thing about like just like having variety. You know what I mean? This is why D&D like stories. I'll actually just say this: heist stories, right? Heist stories work so well because you're getting a team together, and when you get that team together, the audience can each choose their favorite member of the team and root for that person, or just look forward to seeing them in action. You know, I can't wait till the hacker guy hacks some shit because that's so cool to me, right?
Right. Heist stories are a great way of. I mean, technically, you could argue they can be plot or character driven, but either way, it's still highlighting how unique each character is, which is always something I think you should be trying to do in storytelling. You should always be not necessarily rooting for every character, but at the very least, they should feel different. They should feel unique and memorable. I think that's one of the big rules with storytelling that you want to do. And that it's not an absolute rule either. Obviously, you're going to have side characters that are just there for one small purpose, but as a general rule for like your main cast, absolutely. I think highlighting those different roles, those different strengths and weaknesses, that's one of the big things you can explore in writing. It's one of the things I certainly love about it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And yeah, like I said, like another having all many factions to choose from, and like characters if it's on a smaller scale, right? If there's no factions and it's pretty homogenized, then that's when you just double down on really vibrant, colorful, interesting characters, because people want that choice. I guess it like creates the illusion that everything is bigger than it actually is. Because really think about it, when you boil it down to like a binary choice, or like even like 6 different factions, we'll say, that's still like a finite number, which is 6. And I guess, yeah, you could extrapolate into each one of them, but to do it in a satisfying way, you would need some pretty deep lore, which, I mean, I have no doubt any of us indie authors could easily achieve by just like thinking about each faction's thing. But when you break down at the process of going about doing it, it really is simple. It's like, I'm starting with the tip of this iceberg, the number 6. Okay, I have 6 different ones. Okay, we got water, fire, air, earth. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you just designate something to each of these 6 things, and then you can just now, okay, that's really easy. It's almost no brainer. It's almost elementary. Now let's start with water. Why are they water? Okay, they worship the rain because they believe this other thing. And then from those 2 things, you can extrapolate 3 things from each of those. And really, you're just taking it one step at a time and writing it down. You're not actually doing anything but something that's akin to the scientific method, is what it is. It's a method. So really, a lot of people think that you have to have some sort of like unique hyper intelligence to write, or even world builder or whatever, or to plot or plan or outline. But dude, it's just a method. It's like doing math.
There's certainly a method to the madness. For me, what a lot of what you can boil down fiction writing to is, at the end of the day, you're asking yourself questions. At the very least, in the realm of kind of like sci-fi, fantasy, and even a lot of horror, you're
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
how deep those questions go, it can vary just depending on what you're wanting to do. But for me, I think that's one of the reasons why having a good antagonist is so important, because what they're essentially doing is they're posing questions that the main characters need to answer. And it doesn't even have to be a complete answer either, but it gives both them and you something to think about as the conflict itself is happening. And how deep those questions can be, it doesn't have to go particularly deep, but it should be. It's just how you're relaying those ideas to your audience. I think that's part of what's really important. I'll kind of cite the example of Conan, like the Conan the Barbarian movie specifically, one that a lot of people have seen. In the opening act, his home village gets sacked by a group of bandits, and then years later he's searching for revenge, and it turns out the man who killed his mother and father is a cult leader. And during this whole time, there's the question posed of the riddle of steel. What is kind of like the riddle of steel? What will allow Conan to go into Valhalla and be revered by Crom? So, and it's not just Conan asking himself this question. It's his father telling him what he believes it is, as well as Tulsa Doom. So you're getting different ideas, different angles to this question. And before, at the end of the movie, Conan himself is basically telling off Crom to say, "Help me or to hell with you," which is one of the primary themes of Conan, which is freedom. And for me,
even from the divine, right?
That's a really good example of how you can use conflict and a good antagonist to just pose these very like speculative questions just to give you food for thought. It's one of the things I love about fiction, for sure.
Always be asking.
Always be asking.
Always be asking. And if you can't think of any question to ask, do you know a great default? First of all, I want you to think of the default question that you would ask if you can't think of any other question to ask, right? Does that make sense? Think of that and then let me know.
What is the question I would think to ask if there's no other question to ask?
Like something that you would fall back on, like I'll just grind on this again. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this idea. Something that just comes easy to you, you know? What do you think?
One thing I always like asking, just as a speculative question,
yes.
what is I mean, it's semi-rhetorical because you already kind of know the answer to it, but what is the true nature of man? Of course, there's going to be an element of violence there, but there's also an endless amount of variations to that answer. So there's a cyclical element to history in that as well. So that's why I like to ask that question as sort of a fallback, because it's a loaded question. That's how I would phrase it. And you can kind of like just go from there, start exploring different ideas, like ancient civilizations such as the Roman Empire, ancient Greece, kind of like their different nuances on aspects of what makes civilization, what is the ideal nature of humanity.
That's like Rome, right? Civilization and stuff. But yeah, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, but that's kind of like just, I would phrase it more as it's a question that just allows you to speculate, and that's what I like. I was always just one of those people that just likes to have something to kind of like let your mind wander to, and that's one of the first questions that comes to my mind.
So like the human condition, or like more like human nature?
Yeah, sort of like the human condition, what you can do about it, also how you can react to it and anticipate for it.
And that's where the hopeful message comes in, the grim bright. Human nature is the grim, and then how you can cope or react to that is the bright.
It's also a question with an inherent amount of conflict attached to it, because mankind is naturally bound to disagree, and there's going to be a certain level of war and violence to that. So it's like that's where the element of conflict comes in. How do you plan around that? And how do stories handle that more accurately?
How do you navigate it? Yeah. How do you swim those waters? How do you float them? What stars do you follow? Yeah.
I try that when people say that, like war, rape, things like part of human nature, I think that is it's a cop-out to not do better, because we know better as a species, so we kind of use that to keep being shitty, murder or whatever, don't you think?
Right, that's sort of like I would call it like the default, like, basic state of humanity when it's like all reason is removed. But at the same time, it's like a lot of Roman philosophers kind of pose the idea, what is the ideal human? And what is, because we're always trying to strive towards something better. So it's like there's that element of we're always trying to conquer that nature, which is, it's one of the fascinating bits of speculation I like to do anyway. Just like it naturally breeds stories from that, just like that natural bit of conflict. I know I'm kind of going into a bit of a tangential rambling just by posing that one question, but at the same time, it is something to kind of like, it's something I really like to wrap my head around and try and think different possibilities, for sure.
Yeah. The default I was gonna say, if nobody can think of another one, I would say, what's the point? Meaning, like,
that's also a big question, for sure.
What's the and like you can extrapolate from there. So it's like let's say you got writer's block, you hit that wall, and you're like, damn, but you only got like 18 more minutes left to write, and you got to keep going. You can just default to what's the point, and then you're like, okay, what's the point of what? This scene? Okay, what's the point of this conversation? What's the point of this character? And something will present itself eventually if you just keep asking that question, right?
Yeah, and that's what it all comes back to: asking yourself questions, which leads to more interesting questions, and just answering that, you get this natural narrative flowing through. That's a big part of how characters are formed, though not exclusively, but it's still an interesting train of thought. I know one of the main bits of speculation I have in the Curse of the Star Raids is, what is the path to paradise? Is it even paradise? Is it even feasible? So the antagonistic force in the Curse of the Star Raids is indulge in your pleasures. Like, it's a very perverse way of paradise. It's touted as paradise, but when you really dig into it, it's anything but. It's purported as the best aspects of humanity by celebrating the very worst. So it's kind of the idea of progressivism taken to its absolute extreme. That was one of the ideas I wanted to explore in the Curse of the Star Raids. Not just that, but it was certainly a good topic for speculation. And that's kind of what spiraled about from Vinland Saga, because one of the I believe it's Canute, one of his major revelations is he's going to create a paradise where it's basically a man-made paradise. And I'm like, let's explore that idea. Just start asking some questions on how that would work, because in my opinion, it would be very easily corrupted. And that's kind of how the whole concept of Alcaron, the Elgrathian race, kind of came about. Basically taking that idea of self-indulgence and making a religion out of it.
Oh yeah. And just by nature of it.
Sorry for doing my makeup in the car. I accidentally grabbed the wrong makeup bag, so it's all a bunch of crusty ass old makeup. So it took a while and it's bad, but I look like a person going in there. So I'm all tired but I've been listening to you guys talk. I just don't have a lot of input as I'm not a writer sometimes. So there's like long streets on our cast. I let the writers talk. I let the grown-ups talk.
That's all right, babe. Yeah, you're still an editor though, and you actually have a lot of good insight on stories in general, like when we're watching movies and stuff. So just feel free to chime in whenever, but don't feel like obligated to if you can't think of anything. That's all right.
I'm good at predicting stuff for sure. But
it's crazy.
Before I go into my appointment, of course. John's gonna be over at 7:30, babe.
All right.
The value of editing can't be understated, especially for someone like me who likes to get really abstract with questions. Sometimes it's always good to have another person to just kind of like reel you back in and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. I know I have a few people who have essentially either edited or beta read the stories that I've written, and it's always something you never even think about, but it always comes back to, hey, 2 and 2 doesn't add up. But at the same time, they're usually giving ideas on how it could be better. And just the value of that alone, it's one of the sooner you realize it whenever you're writing something, I think it immediately helps improve your craft. Just being able to take other ideas to make your own stories better.
Yeah, right. I do like the copy and line editing. So like sentence, it's not just grammar and if I'm like, this sounds better if you word it this way, things like that. But I will give my opinion as far as, for example, I'm right now, and not one character is like, there's no description of these characters for the longest time, for like chapters. And so,
yeah.
You need to know what they look like.
Yeah, but at the very least, if nothing else, what they sound like. If nothing else.
Yeah, something like that. But there are like no description. So, I'll put a note, like, say at the end of the chapter, I'll be like, what does so and so look like? What's this? What's that? So I'll like just ask a question in my edits.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And then what I do, it'll all be in black, and then I'll put, after a sentence, I'll put it in parentheses and all in red, and I'll be like, how about this for a sentence? And I'll just type it all out. So I fix it, delete my stuff, no worries there. Or just ignore what I say. They don't have to listen to me.
Right.
And that's why we don't just cheat.
And that's always one of the decisions you have to make it whenever you're writing something. Especially if it's multiple people giving you their input, some of it's naturally going to conflict. So at the end of the day, it's about being able to parse through all of that, see what is the best, what do you think is the best outcome for your story? Because naturally you want to make your story as good as possible, but it's not always going to be an idea that's brought up is automatically going to make it better, or it may just take it in a different direction. It may not even be what you want to do. So yeah, that's also a skill, I would argue, unto itself, being able to kind of like distinguish the different ideas and suggestions that whether you're an editor, beta reader, alpha reader, just being able to make that distinction, see what benefits what you're doing and what you just kind of want to leave to the wayside. That's part of it.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
It's a skill, for sure.
Yeah. Knowing what and what not to write is also another powerful skill.
Yeah, and that and frankness, it's also a skill I'm still working on myself. So I guess you could say it's my amateur writer bleeding through there.
We all struggle with that. Say again, babe?
I asked him what he means.
I guess you could say finding inspiration for stories. I mean, because inspiration isn't always going to come to you, but at the same time, if you're an author, one of the best ways to work around that is finding the process that helps you come up with that inspiration. Even if you're not inspired that day, you can still find things to do that helps kind of like solidify, at the very least, a story idea in your head, or maybe even an outline, or maybe even starting a first draft. It all depends. And particularly like brainstorming, coming up with notes, outlining. That's all things that's helped me. But then again, I know plenty of professional writers out there who are much more elaborate, and from what I've seen, their methods are very tried and true, but it helps them specifically. They're very good methods. But yeah, each writer has their method, I guess, and finding that out, I think, is a big way of kind of like coming up with what you're writing specifically. That was more or less kind of like the point I was making.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will see you guys in a little bit. I'll join unless it's already over, but I don't think my appointment will take
long. Oh, okay.
So have fun. It's nice meeting you, Otter, but I think I'll be back before you're done. So
yeah, it was nice meeting you too, Mrs. Pritchard. It's always an honor.
Mm-hmm. It's always an honor.
Always an honor.
And if you want watch worthy to just watch some random videos and do commentary and just hang out, whatever, that's all. And if you ever want to do like a really formal interview, we have to record mine with Andy, and I have a few people I want to, but very serious, recorded conversation, and it's like all about like an interview to really get to know you and your books and characters, different things like that. So once I put Andy's up, I'm gonna have all you guys take a peek, and whoever wants to do something like that too, I'm all about that. So it'll be like very formal, professional interview style.
Yeah, and either way, I can't really complain with that. So yeah, if you're ever interested, yeah, I don't think I would be saying no to that.
Oh, hell yeah.
Awesome. Well,
hell yeah. All right, have a good one, babe.
I'll see you guys in a bit if you can hear me.
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, now I can hear you. Okay.
So anyway, what's your take on the Warhammer controversy recent?
So I'm not really all that familiar with the Warhammer controversy. What would you say is a good breakdown of it?
So before the listeners at home are rolling their eyes out of their head about, oh, he brought up Fallout and Warhammer again. Well, here's the thing. Here's why it's important. Especially if you're not familiar, right, Otter? Like you got a popular book out now. Like you're kind of becoming a name in the Iron Age. It's important to talk about this stuff, in my opinion. But essentially, what the controversy is, just to freshen you up here, is they have some established rules in their universe, in the lore, right? As you do.
Yeah.
And they started negotiating with Amazon for a show with Henry Cavill and stuff. And essentially, they're retroactively changing the lore now.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if it had to do with that or not.
So what it is it's like breaking a promise. right? That's what, when you have established lore, when something is canon, and when you have like the basic rules of the universe established, those all become social promises, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's why people react so emotionally to these things, because it's a promise that's been broken to the individual. So what happened is they have one of their factions is, one of the rules is they're all male. It's 100% male, and they decided to implement females into this faction. Now, you can do that properly if you have a forward-thinking mindset.
I thought there was like a female-focused faction in the Imperium, I believe.
There's several. There's the Sisters of Silence, the Sisters of Battle, and the
Yeah,
alien elves are a 50-50 mix of male and female. So they have some badass female warriors over there. There's females all over the place, bro. There's no need for this. In fact, people would actually probably love if they chose one of the already existing female factions, and just, if you need to put that much of a focus on females in this IP, just make a show about that female faction. It's fine, as long as you don't mess up the lore. People will be happy to see a Warhammer show. But I digress. Essentially, where the issue comes, it's not the fact that it has nothing to do with females, right? The issue is the promise being broken, because if they had a forward-thinking mindset saying, well, there always was just male, but then now this thing is going to happen, and the first females are being implemented. And that could work if you do that. If you do it correctly, some people would still be upset. But the problem is they have a backward thinking mindset where they're looking backwards and they're just gaslighting the audience and saying they've always been there, which is not
right.
true. That's
And
just not true. Yeah.
I know I know some about the controversy where it's like isn't it like they're trying to make female Astartes? Is that the case?
Custodes, which are
Okay.
Custodes are the personal bodyguard of the emperor.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not too well versed with my 40K lore. I remember seeing some of the controversy online for sure. Yeah, if the writers actually knew what they were doing, they could probably find a more nuanced approach of having a female character like with the Sisters of Battle or Sisters of Silence where it would actually work. But it's they're taking the easy way out. The very shallow approach of, oh, I can put in female custodes, female space marines just for that easy checkbox, because for them it's really not about the setting. It's really about checking off a box to really just for very basic virtue signaling. And my guess is it's probably also a prerequisite to actually get greenlit. That's my personal guess.
That's what I was that's the other part. Like I said, they started negotiating with Amazon, and then now all of a sudden the lore changes. Like when you zoom out and just look at the timeline of like announcements, it's like concerning. It's like, oh, okay. It's like, boom, right here they go into negotiations, and then like one of the next things is they were always there. We're breaking our promise, basically.
My guess is they probably took one look and saw that it was a male only faction, and they probably just shook their heads and said, "We can't have any of that." If there is going to be something like that, it with a lot of these publishing companies, it's almost like a rule of thumb. They have to be depicted as evil. And I know for a fact that every faction in 40K is like varying degrees of not good. Maybe I'm wrong on that fact, but
no, 100%. They all have. Okay, so this will lead this. I've already touched on the social promise thing, and we can talk about that more with writing. That's the whole reason I brought up Warhammer. But you're getting into another one, which is true neutral storytelling. Like not just like the modern memes that everybody has all this baggage attached to, like, oh, gray morality. He's a gray character. That's a gray faction. None of that stuff. More like they are probably the greatest example of showing how everybody can be badass to the point where you would play as them, you would root for them and stuff, but they're all horrible at the same time. So since like nobody's a good guy, and you can kind of make their horribleness one of the badass things about them. So like the humans, for example, the emperor has to sacrifice like 10,000 people a day to keep him alive because they view him as like their god, and there's more to it. I'm not a lore expert, but that's just like a staggering thing to think about. 10,000 people every single day dying just to keep the emperor going, and he's like the source of the magic or whatever the lore may be, is horrifying. It's not a good thing, right? But it's also fascinating and kind of epic in its own way, right? Like the xenomorph aliens are extremely invasive.
Right. It's
But they're crazy badass at the same time. Imagine xenomorphs from Alien, except they can wield swords and shit. Like, holy fuck! Like, oh my god, dude.
I think it's kind of like what Mr. Mindflayer said in the chat, where he was saying that Fallout is very absurdist. I would argue a similar thing for 40K, where it's taking these like very like unethical and horrific things and just exaggerating them to the extreme.
Yes.
Either almost to a comical point where it's doing something unique with it. So 40K is a really good example of that from what I've seen, where probably the quote unquote best faction out of all of them is the orcs, where they just want to mindlessly kill, and they are considered the most moral of everybody.
That's so true. Yeah, they're an invasive species, right? So
Yeah.
they're not truly evil. They're not truly evil, but they're a problem because it's an established rule with them that they will basically just consume wherever they live. If it's only them, they're going to cover the whole planet with orkiness and consume everything, and then just start consuming each other to survive. And that's the end result of an orc planet. Like, it just becomes like the apex Mad Max rivalry, Darwinism bullshit. You know what I mean? They're the zebra mollusks of space.
Yeah, and I also think whenever you can deal with sort of like this absurdist like morality, I also think Judge Dredd is another good example of having a character you can root for that's in a very that's in sort of like this twisted society. You can play around with those ideas, but create still create characters that you can latch on to. They inhabit this world. They'll have sort of like this twisted sense of morality, but it still works for what they're doing.
100%, yeah.
I still kind of argue it's like you can have stories where your main protagonist is not a good person at all. As a general rule of thumb, what I also like to argue, maybe there's exceptions to this. I'm not going to claim I'm an expert, but no matter how bad your protagonist is, I think your antagonist should be worse.
Because otherwise you're just following the antagonist.
Yeah, at that point you're creating this weird sort of like you're creating this weird subversive effect where, strangely enough, you're rooting for the antagonist instead of the hero, which it creates this disparity, and it just leads off. It often leads to you not enjoying the story near as much, or it's a very ironic enjoyment, one or the other. Either way, it's not necessarily ideal.
Yeah, you probably anything that makes your audience do a double take is probably something you should think about a second time.
I also think that's part of why a lot of people prefer genres like darker genres like grimdark compared to something with more static kind of like binary heroes. I don't even think it's generalized. What I think is sort of the stigma against just bad storytelling, bad implementations of these paragon heroes where they're basically just cardboard cutouts. They're not actual people. So there's plenty of stories out there that have Paragon heroes without a character arc that work just fine. A lot of the
you're talking about iconic characters?
Yeah, iconic characters like
yes.
Superman, Conan the Barbarian, where they're not really changing, but they're sort of acting as sort of like this ideal image of a man or image of a woman, image of a person in that situation.
It's an archetype, but more than just any archetype. It's like max level.
Yeah,
they're already max level, like Deadpool. Always has to be Deadpool.
And this is something I've seen the internet loves to argue in circles over this topic, but what I really think it boils down to is I don't see iconic characters bad at all. What I think a lot of people are critiquing is it's usually just the bad stories with them in it, where it's just not good stories. It's usually just bad character motivations or just mishandling of tone. It's a number of reasons.
The cliches.
Yeah, it's
where they do.
It's where you start to see the cliches. It's not because the cliches themselves are bad. It's just bad storytelling.
Yes. I think you're spot on with that. Essentially, yeah, like, and that's why I want to like differentiate the differences between all these things, because like if you have a negative connotation towards tropes, you can cut yourself off from archetypes. Archetypes are powerful, they're timeless. Tropes are too, if you fully understand them, and the difference between a trope and a cliche is so vital, like if you just decide that, like John Douglas's Chosen One character, if you wanted to write your own Chosen One, the fact that you know that there's something out there that exists called the Chosen One character or the Chosen One trope or the Chosen One archetype, you can do research on that. You can find all the highest rated movies and video games revolving around Chosen Ones, Zelda, and basically do a bunch of research and come up with like a new original take, like your version of this cultural. It's a cultural trope, it's a cultural trope.
And I also think it's just important not only seeing good examples of it being done well, but also the importance of why there's a Chosen One in that particular story. Maybe
why?
Maybe a lot of it can be boiled down to, well, it's the forces of evil threatening to thrust the world into imbalance. The Chosen One needs to right the wrongs and bring balance back again. I mean, that is something that's perfectly serviceable, and many stories work with that as well. But just so long as you're actually kind of like considering why you're using those tropes, I think that's going to be even more useful to you, because it's all tools in your little toolbox. The trope should serve you, the writer, not the other way around.
Well, it's like I said before, what's the point, right?
Right.
What's the point? So like, okay, trope. Cool. I want to do this trope. Chosen One. What's the point? What's the point of a Chosen One? What do you mean? Yeah. What's the point of it in your world, right? Well, now that just opened up a powerful door.
Yep.
Right. Now you can add a world building element to your Chosen One. Like it's not special to this story. No. This Chosen One is built into this world. This is a world thing. Like the first one that pops in my mind is the one who will balance the Force in Star Wars. That's a really weak one, but it is kind of imbued into the fabric of the world. Now there's an even better one. God, I know there's good examples here.
I can point out a few. I can point out the ones that I despise whenever we're dealing with like the Chosen One trope. It's usually the ones that deal with it in a very surface level. Oftentimes they're trying to subvert it, but they make it like comically simplified to where why on God's earth would you root for this character in the first place?
Yeah.
They just seem like an asshole. Why are they even the Chosen One? quote unquote.
Yeah, and on top of that, you know, I already know they're gonna win.
Yeah,
I already know the end of the story. Like, what? What's the?
I think those are the worst instances of when they're used.
So again, we double back to that default question: what's the point, right? And if you can't answer that, then it's really shallow. It's a really shallow thing to depend on. So like having a chosen one built into the world. I'll use Zelda. Zelda is a fantastic example because quite literally, the world needs Link to exist, and not the one Link character, not the one main protagonist Link. Like the reincarnation of the hero of time is what it comes down to. It is a curse. It's a timeless curse that is doomed to repeat over and over again. And the main character Link is not the same Link every single time. It's literally a different person each time. Quite frankly, the chosen one of the world, and it's built into the fabric of like how everything works, because like there's this demon that is being reincarnated over and over and over again because of you know, he's just that angry and has this ancient curse, right? So part of that is reincarnating the hero of time over and over and over, and it's just this endless cycle. So now you get to ask all these questions about cycles and the nature of like where society has been and where it's going. You know, there's a lot of like ancient aliens type shit that you can start asking. Like
There's a lot of one thing I've learned is fantasy loves to deal with cycles. There's usually a cycle for something. That's one of the tropes that fantasy loves, and I'm also a big fan of. I think if you know how to work with it, it can be very fun to just bring up some really fun ideas. And I agree, Zelda is one of the best examples where there's an element of history repeating itself like every age. It's like there's always going to be Ganon or some variation. Some games it's Vati or whatever, but there's always going to be a Zelda. There's always going to be a hero, and there's always going to be that battle to kind of like bring balance that will either bring a new golden age to Hyrule or it'll be a new dark age. That's usually what happens between each game.
Yeah, and that dark age will eventually fall, and a new golden age will, you know what I mean? And it's just up, down, you know.
It's another thing that the Dark Souls series handles very well.
Yes, the chosen one. Oh, dude, that's almost better than Zelda. I'd say it's right up there with it.
It was heavily inspired by Zelda, so I believe that's why it kind of deals with a lot of similar ideas.
Yeah, it's built into the world, dude. Both of these franchises, they've built the chosen one into their world. Like, you don't have Dark Souls without the protagonist trying to break the cycle. You don't have Zelda without the hero of time being reincarnated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it. So that's where it works, but it almost doesn't work with my first example, Star Wars. The one who will bring balance to the Force because reasons.
Because what?
Because reasons.
Yeah, there's no narrative stakes given for us to care.
Because reasons. You don't ever want because reasons. So you know that golden question: what's the point of this scene, of this chosen one, of this whatever? And almost always the answer comes down to, man, you should really put this into your world somehow. I'll put so stakes. You mentioned stakes. How's this for a juicy T-bone? Reincarnation. Where do you fall on that? That's a trope.
Reincarnation?
Sorry. Not reincarnation. Resurrection. Resurrection. That's a trope. That is a trope.
It feels like there's different ways you can take it. So depending on how it's dealt with, my thoughts on it vary quite a bit. What I like is I don't mind resurrection being in a story, but what I really like is if there's a cost to it somehow. Because like if you can just die and come back unscathed, there's no real consequence to anybody's actions. So it's like for the stories that do have resurrection in there, you'll often see this where it's like they're resurrected, but they're not the same person. They're like I'll actually compliment A Song of Ice and Fire for this, where Khal Drogo gets resurrected, but he's a shell of a man.
Oh,
he's
God,
alive,
so
but only
awesome.
just. He's
Yeah,
basically
I love that.
he's basically a human potato.
No, you got to give credit where it's due, for sure.
Yeah, but that's my opinion on resurrection, because it's if you eliminate the cost of death, well, there goes a lot of your tension. There goes a lot of your stakes. Death is just a minor inconvenience. It's no longer near as damning as it could be. That said, I know there's going to be stories out there that play around with that concept, do something really unique with it. I know there's some anime out there that has that as its central core concept, and it does some really fun things. I'm sure it's out there, but in general, I think it's not necessarily what you can do, but it's like the limitations attached to it. There's always got to be a catch somehow.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what I'm there for. If your story deals with resurrection that has a very interesting catch to it, I'm much more likely to really enjoy it, or to at least follow it.
Well, because then it's interesting, right?
Yeah, then it's interesting.
It's interesting.
It's all about, like, limitations are there to help deepen the conflict. It's another way of asking questions that your main character needs to solve or work around. And the more they can work around it and actually learn, you're going to be attached to that protagonist more often than not. So I think that's one of the real advantages of that. It can't just be, oh, I'm a god now, I automatically win. That's boring.
Yeah, I agree. Real quick, Evely, been listening and lurking, just saying, hey, Ultimate Kahuna, hey, snaps 3 fingers in Z formation. And he says, the Chosen One in the Wheel of Time is a really fascinating example. Are you familiar with the Wheel of Time?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Wheel of Time series. I've read some of the first 2 books. Yeah, I can't say I'm the biggest fan of the series, but what it does right, I think it does really right. The Chosen One trope it uses there is done really well. It's very introspective in how it handles sort of like a lot of the Chosen One tropes.
Yeah. I'm unfamiliar with it, so if you want to break it down for me, I'd love that.
What I know of the story is a lot of it kind of centers around the Dragon Reborn. So the world itself is kind of like, I think it's after the world has been, I think it's referred to as the breaking of the world. Like the world is basically a husk of what it once was, and there's a lot of these metaphysical forces such as the light and the dark one. You can pretty easily kind of like make comparisons to whether it's some easy like binary like light dark references there, but the Dragon Reborn is there to kind of like help bring a semblance of balance. I'm not going
to the Avatar.
Yeah, it plays a lot with a lot of familiar tropes, but it's also a matter of kind of like tapping into their version of magic, which is called the One Power. And this is one thing that Wheel of Time does in a very interesting way. It's like magic users in their world are almost always female, because the male half of their magic is corrupted. Most men who wield magic are doomed to go insane and kill their loved ones. So it's like they're heavily policed in that setting. I don't know too much more than that. I've only read so much, and even then it's been a little while, but I do think it throws some very interesting twists on like very familiar tropes. I know a lot of people will cite it as one of the most interesting examples of kind of like doing something unique with a lot of ideas that are very familiar.
Yeah, that is fascinating, actually. Yeah, and the reason I bring up resurrection is because like it's one of the best examples I have of you know, it's if it's built into your world, it's absolutely acceptable, right?
Yeah.
Like like resurrection, chosen one. Like what are some other horrible just cliches? Let's just go right to cliches. What are some other horrible cliches? Because I guarantee you each time, if you just fold it into the fabric of the world that you're building, it'll work.
We're not so different, you and I. There's a big trope, and there's a good reason for that trope too.
Yeah, because what they're doing is they're saying the theme of the book out loud. That's the problem with that trope.
Pretty much, they're leaning more on telling than showing there, and unfortunately, it's for a vital part of the type of story they're doing.
So I think the issue with that trope is literally just saying it out loud. So unless you want to challenge yourself, unless you want to challenge yourself and say, I'm going to not only use this trope, I'm going to say it out loud in the dialogue, and I'm going to do it right. Unless you want to do that, then I think the best course of action is to get the audience to see that for themselves and ask that question without you having to say it out loud. Like you show them. And moreover, you actually try to avoid that theme directly, and you kind of get them to put the pieces together on their own and be like, oh, wow, the protagonist is the same as the antagonist. I like this a lot more now. Because I think that realization moment when you're shown that, I think it just pays it up. It pays it off a lot better.
Yeah, what I think some of the best stories out there they'll find a good way of showing the themes rather than telling you. It's more like they'll show what's unraveling as events just kind of transpire, and it'll just lead you down a train of thought. It's like natural questions you'll start asking yourselves. I think that's one of the best things that you can do. For me, it's one of the most powerful ways of doing it too. Again, I'm citing Berserk a lot, mostly because a few of us are actually reviewing it on a different YouTube channel. But that's a fantastic way of handling more of a grimdark subject matter. But none of it's being told to you; it's very cleverly shown to you.
And Dark Souls, yeah.
Dark Souls is another one where it'll show a lot of what's going on, and it just leaves you asking questions. And I think that's one of the best. I think that's one of the best things that you can do is just leave your audience asking the right questions.
Chef's kiss.
Yep. Chef's kiss.
Indirect storytelling. Gotta love it. We got some more. We got some more chats here. Let's see.
Yeah, I see Kahuna is a lot more familiar with Wheel of Time than I am.
Yes. He's very well read, dude. He reads a lot. It's amazing.
Yeah, he reads more than I do. And I try to read a lot, but he's leagues beyond me.
Yeah, same. There are cycles in the world that always repeat, and the spirit of certain people are born over and over again. Okay. Certain people. These people who change the pattern around them instead of the other way around. Okay. So there's special people, there's special souls that exist in that world that keep reincarnating.
Essentially. They're like chosen ones who actually change how fate is transpiring.
Gotcha. Time Lords.
I do remember that much. That was explained a little bit in the second book, The Great Hunt.
So instead of the chosen one, it's more like the chosen few, and that's how they get around that trope. They're still using that trope, but
there is still like a dragon reborn. I forget the exact distinction between Taverin and the dragon reborn, because the main character Rand is the dragon reborn, but a lot of pretty much him and everyone else are Taverin. They're actively influencing fate.
That makes a lot more sense, actually. And oh, Emily's back, and let's know what's happening. Oh, Elden Ring. He brings up Elden Ring.
I've actually never checked out Elden Ring. I really need to. I've checked out a lot of the Souls games. I've also checked out Bloodborne, but I've never played Elden Ring.
Yeah, I checked out Bloodborne myself too. Some of these IPs, when they do a story very well, I really cannot help but just go click on a lore video and listen to it. It's like a book to me, dude. Like, just
especially
absorb it.
with Dark Souls or anything FromSoft has made within the last 10 to 15 years. They leave their actual narrative so vague that it's pretty much made the careers of a few people on YouTube, like Vati Vidya.
Oh yeah, I've never heard of them, but
yeah, his channel is pretty much exclusively like FromSoft lore speculation, and I really believe it's made his career. Just their games being as obtuse as they are.
Sorry, my dogs are barking. Bear with me here. It made their reputation, you said?
Yeah, it pretty much made his career, just because everybody who plays the FromSoft games, it's like you can piece together parts of what's actually going on, but he'll create it in more of kind of like a narrative storybook form. And it like, in fairness, he does a very good job of actually tying it all together. I don't know how accurate all of it is, but it's still, he still has a way of kind of like catching your attention. And each new FromSoft game in that kind of style and format, it only brings more people to his channel and others like him.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of a few Fallout lore video YouTubers. There's the Epic Nate and Oxhorn. Those two are awesome. They do like these dudes who just lay out all the lore or just discuss one of the mysteries, and by discussing one of the mysteries, they have to explain a lot of the lore. It really is just, it's like I said, it's like a good book, dude, because you're just getting right to the writing of the game. And a lot of games try to have like these memorable, crazy good writing. You know what I mean? Video games are very competitive. Yeah,
and I'll stand by the fact that I think if you're looking for some of the best writing in video game, this is also just my personal opinion, but I think the more you kind of dive into the CRPG side of things, the more elaborate and complex the writing will get. You can still have some very good stories that are on the simpler side of things, but if you're looking for more of that novel style of writing, I found that like a lot of the time anyway, kind of like games like Planescape Torment, Baldur's Gate, Fallout 1 and 2. So you'll find that they have, like, for one, very elaborate lore, but they'll also deal with a lot of complex themes. It's kind of like a halfway point between playing a game and reading a novel in some cases. Like Planescape Torment is almost like a narrative type game, almost.
Yeah. God, and I think now we're starting to touch on what makes a good video game. But to be frank, video games are just stories wrapped up in an entertaining package.
Yeah,
so it's very relevant.
A lot of it depends on genre, but yeah, particularly with RPGs, since a lot of them have such a literary basis, I think that's where a lot of it kind of feeds into the more nuanced stories they'll have. Like I think one of the classic examples is how Gary Gygax had a metric shit ton of inspirations for the original Dungeons and Dragons. Like he was heavily inspired by Jack Vance's Dying Earth saga for how he did magic. It wasn't one to one, of course, but still a lot of heavy inspirations by like him, Robert E. Howard, Lord Dunsany, Andre Norton. The list goes on, and you see that in kind of like as the genres spread out. And I'm very passionate about it just because it was sort of my gateway into reading a lot more books and novels as a kid, and it just kind of grew from there. That's how I bridged over into novels. But I know everyone's different in that regard.
I always had terrible eyesight, so I had to, in my childhood, I had to rely on video games and movies for my storytelling. Because audiobooks weren't really a thing, and when they were, I couldn't afford them. So I was just stuck with my bad eyesight and whatever video games / movies I could borrow or watch or get a hold of at any point in time. But movies and video games were the easiest to absorb. Probably video games the most, right? Just because you're directly in it, you know?
Yeah, I think especially if you're like, as a kid, I had a harder time reading when I was younger. Some of that I would probably suppose is a generational sort of thing where what you're exposed to younger, shorter attention spans, just with everything going on around you. But I digress a bit. I also think video games are a great way to kind of like go from sort of like very snappy, kind of like fiction, sort of like cartoons, shorter movies, to something more long form like novels or novellas, those types of sagas. I always saw it as a great way to kind of like go from one to the other. And even then, a lot of pulp fiction is still meant to be very snappy. It's basically kind of like a variation of sort of like more episodic entertainment, which, as I said before, it's very interesting to just go up the chain and see what inspired what. I love kind of like just seeing that cause and effect.
Right. Yeah, I do too, man. It's endlessly fascinating and actually makes some pretty good world building if you can pull it off in your own story, like cause and effect type stuff, right?
Yeah, I'll cite another author as one of my favorite examples of kind of like wearing your inspirations on your sleeve. Lord Dunsany. He's actually a very underrated writer. He is often credited as the father of modern fantasy. He was like first published in like the early 20th century, but he was heavily inspired by mainly three different things. I'm sure there's much more. A lot of it was the ancient Greek myths, Edgar Allan Poe's bibliography, and the King James Bible. And he combined all of these to basically make his own world, his own mythos, which he ended up inspiring a lot of other classic writers, which you likely know about from that. Like H.P. Lovecraft was a diehard Lord Dunsany fan.
Oh, I bet.
But it's super interesting to see where he went with that. He's highly poetic, and it has some absolutely incredible prose that he does. And it's very short fiction too. The majority of what he writes, like The Gods of Pagana, one of his most famous works is it's very short. It's only like 40 pages or something like that. You can easily read through it in just a few hours, but it's beautiful writing too.
It's fascinating to see where this stuff comes from too. I love it. I on stream the other day we found out that power armor was first appeared in 1932 in a novel or like a short story. So I thought that was cool. It doesn't go to the credit does not go to any modern sources that use power armor.
So I'm guessing it predates Starship Troopers then.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
I didn't know Starship Troopers had power armor. Do tell with that.
Yeah, it's referenced more so in the very beginning of the book. Okay. I know that's often where the credit goes to for power armor is Starship Troopers, that and the term Space Marines. But you got both of those tropes in a book that a lot of it is very expository. I still enjoy the book, but a lot of the actual tropes you get from it are in the very beginning and the very end.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean? Like in the beginning and the end? Just through the expositions?
The best way I'd describe Starship Troopers, and I think this is another way of explaining why a lot of people don't like the book, because the beginning and the end of the book are heavy on the action. That's where they're fighting different alien races, they're going to different planets. The other 75% of the book is going kind of like snapping back in time to where Rico is actually going through training and diving more into kind of like how their system of government works, his own personal experiences becoming a soldier. Like, it's a military story first and a sci-fi story as a distant second. That's
of course
a lot of what Starship Troopers is.
Yeah, I think that's what it's always been. Is it's like it is a military story, 100%.
Yeah, and I still enjoy it for what it is, but the ideas are not subtle. The book it's very much a political book first. You can still kind of like enjoy it for what it is, though. And I see that the same way for the movie as well as the book. The movie is very much a parody of the book.
Yeah, it is a parody, 100%. But yeah. They use the term power armor, I'm assuming.
I believe so. I think so anyway.
The instance of in like 1932, what it was called lensman armor. So like there's these characters called lensmen. I'm assuming because they had like gas masks on and stuff. So it's like they're wearing lenses, right? But they have lensman armor, which is essentially power armor, and that's like so that far ago. And it's just fascinating to see where all this stuff begins, because people are so quick to use something like power armor or a lightsaber, these core universal ideas of storytelling, especially with like sci-fi. I've been on a sci-fi kick lately too, so forgive me.
No, it's fine. It's also very interesting history to go over, because sort of like in anywhere between the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, you had like sci-fi and fantasy were kind of like the Wild West. A lot of it was different writers kind of like coming up with new ideas or stealing from others and adding their own twist to it. So you had a lot of very unique variations going on there. It's really interesting to dig into.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And
yeah, a good example I can think of is Frank Herbert with Dune. I'm pretty sure the shields they use in Dune, that was not an idea that he originally came up with. That was being used in a lot of other sci-fi novellas at the time.
Interesting. And it's so like it's caught on so much with him in his world, right? That's crazy. It's wild. Do you know the history of that? Like where that came from?
Not the exact history.
Right.
I'm assuming you're talking about the shields or power armor.
Yeah, the shields.
I don't know the exact history, to be honest. It's probably something I should look into more myself. All I really know for the most part is the idea of having shields that kind of like warp around your body, where it's like the more kinetic force you bring down on it, the harder the shield repels it. But if it's slight, it passes right through. That wasn't something that was unique to Dune at the time. That was something that other sci-fi authors were experimenting with.
And if you really think about it, I mean, he heavily put it in the plot of Dune, but within the world of Dune, the shields are kind of misplaced. So you can kind of tell that it was maybe added.
Right? Yeah. And I also think it kind of feeds back into a lot of sci-fi fantasy writers' tendency to just explore, throw in ideas and just see how they play off each other. I also think that's a major component to writing in the genre, because a lot of those older stories, they don't even have quite as satisfying conclusions as you'll see in kind of like some more modern renditions. Some of it can actually be very loose, and some of it's for stories I love. In fact, like few good examples is some of Edgar Rice Burroughs' writing. I love Edgar Rice Burroughs, but some of his earlier stories can be a little rougher, even though they're still classics. So it's interesting to see kind of like a lot of these tropes where it's like they're not really established tropes. There's a lot more room where it feels like these writers are just kind of like playing around, seeing what they can do and get away with, and just have fun doing it. And that's what I'm here for. And I think that's also one of the big advantages of the Iron Age. You're starting to see more of that where it's I think it's spinning off from sort of like the tropey stuff where you're seeing a lot of the mentality of, oh, we have to use X, Y, and Z tropes. But I'm also here for what can we really do to try and like push into a new interesting way, a new angle. I think a lot of very long-lasting publications will do this. That's something that Heavy Metal Magazine was very famous for doing. Just seeing what's possible. What new tropes can we establish that work very well for the stories we want to tell?
And this would be speculative, right?
Yeah, very
or
speculative.
like experimental. You could label it as that too.
Yeah, you could easily label it as experimental. And obviously there's going to be shit that doesn't work, but that's part of the fun as well.
You'll get some stinkers, but like as long as you have a good attitude about it, like it's all fun. It's all supposed to be fun, right?
Yeah, just so long as it's fun. And I also count a story as a success if at least one person enjoyed it and had fun with it, and it positively impacted their life in some way. If I can do that with any of my stories, I consider that a success on my part, even if it's a bad story. If I can just leave a positive impact on somebody's life, for me, that's a win.
Right. I mean, ideally, we all want to affect culture in a great way and create the timeless character that lasts through the ages and becomes the next Achilles or Hercules or Beowulf, right?
Yeah, one can hope.
Yeah. All you can do is try, right? All we can do is try and just not think about it too much, I guess. Just do our best and just really let ourselves show in the product.
I like Ray Bradbury's advice. Don't think, just write. Let the story just bleed through your fingers while you're at the typewriter, or more accurately, the computer anymore.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Let it just flow through your fingers, literally, and onto the page.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's one of the joys of writing, and I always try to remind myself of that when I do write. And obviously, you're going to have days where it's tougher to write than others, but it's one of those things you can just tell yourself to help motivate yourself more easily. And yeah, it helps keep me going for sure. The less I think about it, the easier it is for me to write.
Oh, yeah. And you got to just finish it first. And then through the editing and refining, that's when you're sharpening your sword. First, you have to fucking get a blade together first. Like, get the iron. You got to smelt it and get all the impurities out and then pound it into a certain shape first. Get it to be called a sword first and then put that edge on it, right? That's the way to do it.
Yeah, and even with editing, I've kind of been getting into the process of having a plan ironed out beforehand. That way it can help me focus a lot more on what I'm doing. That way you're not going in circles trying to fix stuff that doesn't need to be fixed.
Yeah, dude. And Ultimate Kahuna says that I think is the Lensman armor, inspired armor from Red Rising. But I mean, the Lensman armor just kind of trickles all the way down to Space Marines and power armor and Fallout, T60, power armor or whatever. It starts somewhere. Somebody had to come up with the idea, but now it belongs to humanity, much like a bunch of like Tesla's technology, right? And by the way, the other day I was thinking about how Fallout combines Nikola Tesla with Lovecraft, and it creates something so uniquely Fallout.
I'll talk about one of my favorite aspects of Fallout now that we're back to the Fallout train. I love the dark sense of humor in Fallout.
Yeah.
That's such a unique way to take it.
Humor is one of those core emotions we were talking about earlier. It's a powerful core human thing. Humor, love, fear, right? Continue.
Well, it feeds directly into the idea of, hey, we're exploring the ethics of a post-nuclear world. All right. So we're going to show a lot of really messed up stuff. But instead of just lingering on how dark it just feels like the writers are kind of like nudging you saying, hey, isn't this just the slightest bit funny? Which just makes it even stranger. But it makes it uniquely Fallout.
Cynical. Not
Yes.
nihilistic, not pessimistic. It is cynical.
Cynical is the word.
Thank you. I've remembered it in 2 hours in. Oh my goodness. I got egg on my face now. But yeah, cynical. That's the term I was thinking of, where they're bitter. It's like, it's not nihilism, it's not pessimism. It's kind of like those things, but it's just bitter. That's cynical. That's what Fallout is, and that's how you have space for humor. Because if it's pessimistic, it's like, that's a downer. It's like, things probably won't work out. And then if it's nihilistic, it's like, no, things definitely aren't going to work out, and there's no point to the story. How can you fit humor into those things if you're not like a comedic genius? But if you're cynical, it's like, yeah, look how fucked up these assholes made everything. Isn't that ridiculous? Anyway, here's some more ridiculous shit. Look at that super mutant. It's a big green guy. You know what I mean? Here's some lasers.
It's why I agree with Mr. Mindflayer when he calls it absurdist, because it is.
Yeah.
One, I'm going to spoil a little bit from New Vegas because it's one of my favorite vaults, actually.
So good.
I believe it's Vault 12, I think. The story behind it is everyone goes into the vault right as the bombs are dropping, and apparently this vault is run by an AI system. And it says, oh, congratulations. Every year you have to make a sacrifice to the robot so that everybody lives.
Yep.
And naturally, everybody freaks out over this. The overseer is the one who tells them this, so naturally they sacrifice him first.
Yep.
And then a tradition kind of follows where it's like whoever becomes the next overseer ends up being sacrificed. So you get this natural, like, inverted election where everybody is saying, vote for the other person. I don't vote for me. I'm actually a really good person. So and so is like a murderer, a thief, a liar. Yeah, he needs to be the overseer so he can be sacrificed.
Yep. It becomes like justice system.
Yeah. This eventually leads to like a whole civil war between them, and to eventually to where there's only 5 of them left, and they are so like scarred from like everything they've seen and been through. The next election is coming up for them, and they go, all right, AI, we're just all choosing to die. We don't care anymore. And so the natural response from the AI is, congratulations, Vault citizens. You've shown your willingness to think for yourselves and actually value your own individuality, even against all odds. The vault door is open now. You can leave. We're not going to kill you.
And
it's just this really dark, fucked up humor at the end of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few vaults that are like that too. And yeah, that's like inherently Fallout, dude. It is just a very Fallout thing to have, because you can imagine just how stressful all that drama leading up to that would be. It would get so fucked up before that moment where they just give up and they don't care anymore. It would get so bad before that moment, and then just to have the voice be like, good job, you made it, doors unlocked now, guys, have a good day.
Yeah.
You're upstanding citizens. I believe there's like just like 3 or 4 survivors, and like 2 of them just blow their brains out on the spot or go kill themselves. It's something like that. Because literally, yeah, like you're right. There was a civil war. It gets reduced to like, you can count on one hand how many people are left. So they all know each other very well. this is it. This is all that's left. And yeah, once they found that out, they're all murderers at this point. They've all just like helped contribute in the Civil War in some way.
Oh, Ultimate Kahuna in the chat, he's saying that BioShock is funny in a similar way. I agree with that. And BioShock has a very similar way that it kind of works with there's a lot of infomercials they have for the different plasmids in the game. Yeah, it does something very similar to kind of like what Fallout does with the Vault Boy.
I agree. And Kahuna, there should be a feminist vault where they only lasted 6 weeks. So, as funny as that joke is, there actually is a vault where there is one man and everybody else is female. And there's also a vault with one female and everybody else is a man. Those are 2 separate vaults. Fun fact. So there is
I'm
a
guessing
feminist
neither
vault.
of those ended well.
Probably not. But they exist. I looked over all the canon vaults with my wife before and after the show. It was something we were doing. Yeah. There's also one with 100 dudes, 200 ladies, and one really hungry panther.
Oh, that sounds like a Fallout vault for sure.
Yeah, that's the whole description of the vault, and you don't know what happened, but you can deduce that a few people died, and then humans kind of banded together and set a trap for it, or maybe somebody, the most Fallout thing to do would be this panther goes on a fucking killing spree, and then somebody befriends it.
Yeah.
That would be the most Fallout thing to do.
It would be a very Fallout thing to do. Another vault that I really like is it's incredibly simple, just the setup for it. I believe it's Vault 4, and you see it in the first Fallout game. The only experiment is this, to try and test the effects of radiation on the human body. So what they ended up doing was, whenever the bombs fell, the door for the vault closed, but not all the way. So radiation seeped through, and everybody there either died or became ghouls. So whenever you're coming closer to there for the water chip in the first game, that's called Necropolis, because everybody left there is ghouls, and most of them are feral.
Yeah, they basically they had to have been among the first ghouls, and that very well, it's called Necropolis because it's like the capital city of ghouls, right? And you very well could have that be like kind of like a home base for them, in a way. Get the ferals out of there, or have like a process for the ferals, I guess, processing.
It would certainly help with that problem anyway.
Yeah. Do you just put all the ferals in a cage, or do you cleanse them, so to speak?
Well, I'm gonna assume killing them might be a mercy, because you've essentially lost your mind after living for hundreds of years. That doesn't sound like a very kind existence to me.
I present to you The Walking Dead. Do you remember how they used zombies? They would corral them and then kind of like lead them to an enemy outpost, and then just kind of like disappear.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you can so you could very easily probably corral ghouls, or like, I don't know, you get enough dudes in power armor to pin one ghoul down at a time, and then you like hog tie it and then get it set up in any way you need to, and then just like have more dudes in power armor kind of open a cage with a bunch of them at once in a certain place.
I'm suddenly reminded of, like, what is it, episode 4 of the Fallout show, where she's in the organ harvesting place. Yeah. She's ordering them to free everyone in the cages. They're like, no, not those ones. And she's just insisting everyone. They end up being freed. It turns out they're all just feral ghouls. And she immediately realizes how fucked that decision was.
Also very Fallout.
That is very Fallout.
Yeah, there was so many Fallout moments, man. I just didn't like how there was random encounter. They were trying to do random encounters.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that one was a little too on the nose.
It only worked about half the time. So like it works when Maximus is just fucking around with the armor, and then he comes across the dude that's fucking the other dude's chickens, and like thinks he's doing the right thing, but it turns out the dude was fucking the dude's chickens. And that's very Fallout. But
it's
then you have the
Fallout.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Because everything is presented a certain way. Like you always find out somebody's a group of cannibals or something, whatever the case is. But where it doesn't work is like where they all just kind of happen to wander into the same cave. Nah, not gonna happen.
That was very convenient.
Not happening. Even in Fallout, that's not happening.
There was one part of the show where I was hoping for one thing. It turned out it was a little bit different, but the what is it, like the miracle cure merchant or whatever, the guy who was fucking the chickens earlier.
Yeah.
So one of them, one of the Brotherhood initiates, he has like an absolutely destroyed foot, and he's being offered that it can help him, and it turns out it miraculously heals his foot. The drawback is that somehow it's turned him into a ghoul now. I was originally thinking that it was a twist on the idea of him being a snake oil salesman, because of course a snake oil salesman, it's always bullshit. Yeah. I thought the show was going with the angle of, oh, this is a snake oil salesman who's actually true to his word, despite how shady he may seem. Yeah, and it doesn't even try to explain it.
Yeah, instead of it being like bullshit or whatever, it's actually just like got a monkey's paw twist.
Yeah, and that is also Fallout to a T, to where it's just, it makes no sense, but you're not really meant to think about it.
Yeah, it is what it is. And historically in all the recent games, every limb on your body can be utterly crippled, which is why they put it in the show, and thus healed with like a doctor bag or a stim pack or a drug called Hydra. So what I interpreted as is he actually just inhaled the drug Hydra, which that actually regrows your limb. So you could get your leg cut off and apparently do this drug Hydra, it'll grow it back or whatever, crippled, whatever it is. But where they lose me is where he continues to heal, like he gets shot through the neck with an arrow. So what that tells me is he's got some sort of perk. He got some sort of healing factor perk. I don't think he's a ghoul. And I mean, they could fix all this in season 2 if they explain that. It's not up to us, Otter, to explain any of this for them.
It's up to the writers to explain it for us.
And they should have made it clear in the show, which is where we're doubling back to more storytelling stuff. Like if you have important rules to this story that people are ingesting, if there is important rules to it, you need to make those clear in some way. Even if it does mean directly telling them and breaking the showing versus telling rule. Because guess what? There's no rules. It's just guidelines. That's what everything in writing really is it's all just kind of guidelines, because there's a proper way to do everything. Let's be real.
Oh yeah,
there is. So yeah, even if you got to just outright tell them what these important rules are and break the show versus tell rule, so be it. Because like if it's important for them to understand it for the sake of your world, then they should probably understand it.
Right. What you tell your audience is highly important. What you imply to your audience, just as important, and also what you don't show is just as important. So all of those are different factors to keep in mind.
Yeah. And Fallout, in all the ways that it was weak, that's where it was weak, is it leaves the audience to draw their own conclusions, suspend their own disbelief in some cases. Not good. That's not a good not good writing, technically. Because why are you taking them out of the story completely? Like the show's still playing. They've stopped reading the book. They've paused the video game to think about this and do a few Google searches. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, it takes you out of the experience.
Yeah, that's not good to do ever. You want them to lose track of time and really just love the world that they're immersing themselves in,
Right. And the more you can do that, the more you're doing right, the more they're going to try and follow. Yeah, you don't. I'm trying to remember who exactly said it, but the idea that with storytelling, you want it to be like a contiguous dream. The more you take someone out of it, the more you're failing at your job of actually writing a good story.
100%. But dude, you nailed it. That's it right there too. So, with that, how about we go ahead and wrap things up so I can take care of my dogs here and touch base with my wife. Go ahead and tell everybody.
That sounds good to me.
We did 2.5
pets.
Yeah. I don't have any otters. I wish I did. But yeah, we did 2.5 hours. That's pretty decent. Good talks too about tropes and stuff. Oh, my wifey's back. She can join us for the outro.
What?
Hello.
The
yes.
fuck just say to me?
Yes, you can join us for the outro.
Outro, bitch. Man.
Yeah, we were just wrapping up.
God damn it.
Right?
Sorry, I stink in there. No, I'm just kidding. I did have to figure some stuff about. They wanted me to go back in a week. I'm like, I live 2 hours away. I cannot be back here every week. That's not going to work.
Right.
So I got 2 weeks, which is still ridiculous, but it happens.
It does.
Do you have to go, Lord Otter, like immediately, or can you guys give me a rundown on what you went through?
I can stay a little longer.
Yeah, it's fine. We're just, now that you're here, it's a fresh show. We were just talking about like tropes and timeless aspects of storytelling, and using Fallout as kind of the go-to example, and pointing out some other big name stuff as examples.
It was a lot of Fallout. A lot of Fallout comparisons.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a topical thing. So.
Well,
I do love Fallout.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really big right now. It's always been a big video game, and so like I obviously watched it. We watched the TV show twice, and I watched some loser play Fallout 4 for hours. Not that many, but I watched once in a while. So yeah, I don't know a lot about like the video game lore. So what we did is I wanted to see what each vault was about. Once Andy told me that each vault had its own thing, that was really cool to watch a YouTuber go through all of the vaults and their special thing. So fascinating.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we were talking about how the vaults kind of in it of themselves, create a bunch of different factions and just interesting scenarios for the audience to consume.
Yeah.
And that's one of the universal things that we kind of agreed, like, for a good, vibrant, expansive world, you should probably have some sort of variety. Just to summarize it would be like variety, some sort of variety in your world.
Yeah. What's your favorite vault, Otter?
I think it was Vault 12. I think that's the vault. It's the one where it has an AI ruling over the vault, dictating everybody's decisions, and every year someone has to give over a person to be sacrificed to the machine.
Andy was geeking out about that particular one, actually.
It's a very in-depth story, and the ending is it's one of the best examples of using dark humor in a Fallout game. The dark humor is something that's very unique to Fallout, and I think it's done very well.
Yeah.
That's where they elected the one lady, and then she did away with that, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, she eventually said that this isn't happening anymore, and then there was a civil war, which resulted in only like 4 people surviving. Then those 4 people went to the AI and said, "We give up. We don't care anymore." And the AI is like, "Congratulations for not sacrificing anybody. The door's now unlocked. Have a good day." And then they just killed themselves. So that's the end of that story. Say again?
It did not have a happy ending.
No. But the funny thing is,
the vaults usually don't have a happy ending.
Right. They don't.
Yeah. You mean Fallout doesn't have happy endings?
It does
For
sometimes.
the most part. There are some happy endings in Fallout. It's just not nearly as common.
They do try to keep.
I'm so happy.
Lucy is a very morally good character, isn't she?
There is good morality in Fallout. It actually doesn't try and say, oh, there's no quote unquote good. Now, thankfully, Fallout doesn't do that with its lore. I'm glad it doesn't do that.
Yeah, Katie, we touched on the difference between cynical and nihilistic. Fallout is cynical rather than nihilistic, right? Nihilistic is there's no point to anything. It's so grim that this is all just, even the story is pointless. But Fallout is more cynical, as in bitter, where it's it's painting this grim portrayal, but it's not. There's still a point to it because we're examining a bunch of stuff, and it's just the attitude it has towards these topics. Like for example, Fallout is very anti-war, clearly, but the game is only about war. The show is only about war. You know what I mean? That's that. But that's because it's anti-war at its core, right?
It also kind of dives into the idea that what is man's true nature. That's kind of what's reflected in the very first words. War never changes. Each of the factions kind of reflect that theme in a way. It's one of the reasons why I actually argue that Fallout 3 and 4, even though they're good games, the writing is not quite up to par, because a lot of the faction writing in the other Fallout games, it's like some of them are obviously better than others, but they each have their own fatal flaw, so they're not perfect.
Well, and they even have control vaults where they could intend for these things to just go on forever and actually succeed, but then chaos theory happens, and humans do what humans do. We're inherently flawed in a lot of ways. We're human, and
I feel there was a lot of good dialogue in the show. There was some stuff some parts I wasn't into, most of the brotherhood, but the what the doctor said to Lucy when he was something along the lines of, will you still want the same things when you become a different animal altogether? That's really good, thought-provoking, and it seems kind of...
That's one thing that the show did very well. It's asking a similar question that the games ask. It's what, in order to survive, what kind of what new lows do humans have to stoop to in order to get by? That's also something the show kind of asks, and it does a very good job of it.
Yeah, and it's so true. Will you want the same things when you're a totally different person? It's just, I don't know, it takes your mind to different places, and I just thought it was really good dialogue there. And there's a few other parts too that I can't even specifically remember that I was like, wow, that's some good dialogue, And of course, my favorite character is CX404. I mean, Dog Meat.
Yeah, Dog Meat.
Everybody loves Dog Meat.
Good boy.
Such a good baby.
Mm-hmm.
Every Fallout has a Dog Meat, and Dog Meat is always best boy.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't know. I'm glad the ghoul patched him up, even though he did it to track down Dr. Man. I don't like how he stabbed him at first, and then he's like, you're not him, or whatever, you're not whatever his dog was. But that's really sad they wouldn't let dogs in the vaults. I think it's really weird, because it's why wouldn't they let animals in the vaults? Because you would think, each vault would have a chicken and a pig and or a couple chickens, and animals for food.
I think it could be a couple of different things. One, it may be a liberty that the show took without kind of looking at the lore, or it could have been something that was specific to that vault, because each vault has different rules.
Yeah, I think that one. Because the one has a really hungry panther in it, so it's like,
Well,
I'm sure there's a lot with animals.
Andy did say, yeah, there's a hungry panther. What? Say what? So there might be one with sparkles?
There was one with a really hungry panther in it and 300 people. That's it. That's it. Yeah, that was the whole experiment. Let's just let this panther slaughter everybody.
How about one of the vaults in Fallout 3 where it's just 100 different people in the same vault and they're all clones of the same person called Gary?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Gary.
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 If you ever watch you can go on YouTube and watch prank calls with that soundboard, and it's fucking hilarious. I want to call my Uncle Gary and use that soundboard. Oh, there's some great prank calls with soundboards, like the Hank Hill one. He's like, "Do you know what a hammer is?" And this lady's just arguing with fucking Hank over a hammer at fucking. It's Home Depot. I'm pretty sure it's Home Depot.
I feel like we're all a few degrees of separation away from the Morrowind Dagoth memes. All of the prank calls that have been made using Dagoth's voice from Morrowind.
Yes. Dude, yeah, some of the Skyrim ones are amazing. Looking for Oh, it's such good shit, man. He called someone and they knew they had the person on the phone that it was the Skyrim soundboard or prank or whatever. It was good.
Oh yeah, no, and especially whenever, I don't know, there's still certain like phone prank videos out there that will get me. It's been a while since I've seen any of them, but yeah, when they're done well, they're done well.
Yeah, absolutely. Prank calls are good times. There's a lady on TikTok that does them, and so she'll like wear her wig and go into character, and you talk like this. It's really hard to do because you have to like suck in to make that noise, but she does it so good. And she's like, "What's her name, babe? What's her name, babe?"
I can't remember.
It's
You know her name.
I do know her name, and I can't think, but I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna look quick because it's. Oh God, she's so freaking funny.
Breathing in while you do a voice like that, that's actually really tough on the vocal cords.
Hey,
I've done it a few times myself. It can be tough.
It is. Oh, she's fucking hilarious, and her real voice obviously doesn't sound like that. She might be breathing out though. Like she might not be breathing in. I have to breathe in to make that noise, but that doesn't mean she does. She could just be really good at it. But it's Sue Dillon. It's Sue Dillon. That's obviously not her real name, but it's Sue Dillon, and she is fucking so funny. She goes on lives all the time and does it. So if I catch her on a live, I'll just hang it up in the car and listen to all of her ridiculous calls. And people like you can or order a prank call. So like I could pay however much and have her call Andy or whoever. And like, say this to them, or so it's good times. I support Sue Dillon. I'd vote for her. She's always talking about like your dog shitting in my yard. It's just so fucking funny. Like your husband touched my titty, and like one time she said that she's like, I'm a lot lizard, and she said she was servicing a man and shit in the parking lot, and the dude's just like dying laughing, but and she can do it without like breaking character, and so people probably think she's like legit this fucking old white trashy fucking lady just out of her goddamn mind. It's just pure gold.
Yeah, that sounds like that sounds pretty insane, honestly. The good kind of insane, I mean.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is.
Actually, Andy, there's some of her videos. You should pull one up for him to see, so he knows what we're talking about. Actually, hold on. Let me do something. Let me save one quick for you to pull up here. I'll do it on
Yeah,
my other
sure.
phone. It's she's good shit. So good. Oh my god, my videos. It's ridiculous. Sarah
I got
Green
it.
is her name. Okay.
For my little baby for high school year. This is his third out I had to go to, though. Well, his name is Bobby Joe Dillon. At his other high schools, he was chastised.
Yeah, that sounds like a really tough voice to do.
He ripped every page out of Hank the Cowdog in the library.
I can feel that voice. Jeez.
All three.
Yep.
And at lunchtime,
Talented voice
he would
actors.
take everybody's chocolate milk.
Yeah, for sure.
And chug them. And he would even go to the cooler and chug it every day at lunch until he would throw up all over the white tile in the cafeteria. And there would always be mandarin oranges in it, honey. I don't know. They said they don't even know where he got those. But I'm just trying to get him a fresh start, you know.
Once you have to go online to register him. If you go to our web page, Pastor Stan High School, there is a link on there where you can go in and register.
Well, I don't have a computer, honey, and I have a flip phone. Could you help me out with that? Could I come up to the school?
Well, yeah, I guess we could set you up on a computer, but that will be the only way that you will be able to do that is via, is online.
Okay, honey. Now, do y'all have chocolate milk there in the school system?
You can see she's just trying to maintain her composure.
Yeah, you do serve chocolate milk, okay?
Right.
Well, I'm trying to figure out a solution because he will take everybody's chocolate milk and he will chug it. And he will take it all out of the cooler and he will chug it. And I don't want to see this happen again, you know? I don't want to see him get expelled again over chocolate milk, honey.
Okay, well, man, I mean, I don't know what to tell you at that point because if he does that, and that's going to become a disciplinary issue. And he could end up at our, what we call Pirates Landing, which is our suspension.
Wow. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
That, can't be taking other kids,
The thing is they all rallied. They
retaliate.
Right. They all rallied together, though, and they get him to chug it because they want to see him vomit all over the floor. And when I tell you, it was like a river, honey. It went out past 4 tables. It was such a large puddle, honey, but I'm about to cry because it really chokes me up. It really gets me upset.
Yes, ma'am.
But I don't know. I'll have to talk to him and say, honey, if you get expelled from this one, this is your last shot. You're not going to get your diploma because this is his senior year.
Yes, ma'am.
And
so did he get expelled? Is he classified as a senior?
He is a senior. He's been expelled 3 times from 3 different schools. We school hop around until they get fed up with him.
But did he finish his courses though for him to be classified as a senior?
Yeah, me and Spanky, we've been homeschooling him. I'm telling you.
Spanky.
It's driving me nuts. I've been chain smoking my Virginia Slims to get through those math lessons.
Spanky for the win. Spanky's gonna win through all of this.
All of the verifications and stuff have to be uploaded onto the system as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your help, honey. Have a blessed day.
You too, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Oh,
What?
right. There was another one I had on there on the TikTok. They're shorter on TikTok, but that's okay. We can wrap it up. I have to make a phone call anyway.
Yeah, to be honest with you, the last half an hour, Orcus has been just over here barking, and I've been having to like stay muted basically.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for coming on, Lord Otter. You'll have to again.
Yeah, I'll have to again. This was a lot of fun.
I agree.
Next time, I'll make sure it's at a time when we had to do it earlier because we have a family movie night we're doing tonight and my appointments and stuff. So I apologize. I would really like to be, sitting there in the studio next time.
Yeah, it's no need to apologize. Family movie night, that's always justified.
Oh yeah. So yep, there's the dog. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you, Lord Otter?
Yeah, so I may not have mentioned it before, but I have a book out. It's called Steel and Stormbright: The Curse of the Star Raids. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, all the major retailers. If you want to see what else I write for free, you can check me out on downstreampulp.substack.com. There I write reviews, short stories, and the odd article and essay. I also have a YouTube channel where you can check out some of my live streams. A few of us are also doing some live stream reviews for certain series like Berserk, Fourth Wing, and a few others. So you can, if you're curious about what I do, you can check me out on all those links.
Hell yeah. And you can find our stuff pritchardpub.substack.com. You can find both of us on X. Hers is Moonzilla Tarot. Mine is A_C_Pritchard. I have a book on Amazon as well, Mortal Descent, amazon.com/author/AC Pritchard. Thanks for coming on, boss. Can't wait till next time. And, keep on keeping on. It's cool to hear that you're editing the second one already.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled to share more with it here in the months to come. Yeah, I still need to check out Mortal Descent as well. That's been on my TBR list for a while now.
Oh hell yeah, man! And if money's an issue, there's spirit animals too. It's more animal based. I should have you do a voice or something and give your character an otter. I don't know.
I would be honored. That sounds like a fun time.
Yeah, it would be. It so far, I got Royce. My wife is doing a bunch of voices. I do some. Kahuna, is doing, a voice. I got a few other people lined up. Mind Flayer was in the chat earlier. He's doing one. I think Evalee is his is going to be a little mouse. His spirit animal.
Oh, nice. It sounds like you've got quite the ensemble cast there.
Yeah, I've been cooking, man, and I want it to be kind of like a show. You know what I mean? Since I'm doing it for free and there's episodes, each episode's like a little novella.
Yeah.
I want it to be like a little show. And if I can make my own audiobooks, then get a bunch of cool people to come in and do a bunch of different voices, right? So
yeah, that sounds like a hell of a lot of fun. Yeah, and feel free to reach out about that. I'd be interested in that. Okay,
man. Yeah, I geek out about world building. You can ask Kahuna. We went all in on his. That was fun. And I as a happy byproduct, I came up with a bunch of extra stuff too. So yeah, Spirit Animals is fun to cook in. It's the one that won the poll for our first live stream one shot.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
very nice.
It'll be in Spirit Animals world, Evan tier. So, but yeah, thanks again, brother.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
And catch you next time. Everybody else, cheers.